Chapter 151. No, no, this is not right either. Lily's face was pale, and she stared blankly at the broken potion bottles on the ground. No matter what method she tried, there was no way to stop the silver flames spreading in his body. It was like pulling out the most crucial piece from the stack of building blocks. Collapse and destruction were inevitable. This was the limitation of nature. He was destroying himself. No matter how many life-prolonging potions were injected, it was like putting out a fire with firewood. It was useless in front of this structure that was bound to self-destruct. Perhaps it was, as the Holy Spirit genealogy said. Unless it was really the mercy of the gods, he could no longer be saved. Perhaps from the beginning, he was destined not to receive the so-called salvation. No, it should be said that the salvation promised by the Church had long been implanted in his bone marrow along with the blessed silver and holy objects. With just a small signal, a fatal chain would purify the vampire's original sin and vampire together. Death was the ultimate release. As for whether the illusory gate of heaven would open for him, it was not within the scope of the Church's consideration. Without guessing, Weisher could see the scene of his character summon card's HP being rapidly deducted. Little by little, it was directly erased from the upper limit until the moment it reached 0. Everything would come to an end. Ah, is this the fate of a traitor? In a trance, Weisher whispered softly, feeling a drop of water falling on his face. There were still people by his side, trying in vain to do anything again and again, until they completely fell into despair. Save him. Lily raised her head and stared at her own kind, almost crying out, "Doesn't the White Crown King have any other gifts? Anything that can save people is good." All the crew members were silent, lowering their eyes in pity. "Sorry, child." The captain looked away. "You need to understand that for puppets like us who can't decide when to be born and when to die, the power to save others is too extravagant." Lily looked at him blankly, as if she could not accept it. After a long time, she lowered her head tiredly and stared at her hands. She could not help but choke with sobs. "But clearly I've already gotten life." No one spoke again. They lowered their eyes. "I'm not dead yet. Can you guys not put on a solemn look like you're about to lay a wreath?" Weisher tried his best to open his eyes, but he heard the sound of his eyelids cracking. The fine cracking sound spread across his face, and as he propped himself up, more and more sounds burst out from his body. "Help me up," Weisher said softly. "I can still see you off." Under everyone's stunned expressions, Weisher climbed up from the ground, supported himself with his axe, raised his head with difficulty, and looked around. Then he took a deep breath. "Hey, friend, I'm about to die, so you have to come out and see me, right?" He roared with all his might, feeling as if his lungs were about to burst. "Or are you saying that you're going to hide until the very end and not show your face?" In the silence, everyone looked at each other. In the end, their gazes actually gathered behind Weisher, full of shock and astonishment. A huge shadow had unknowingly appeared behind Weisher. No, he was sitting on the ground. From the very beginning, he had been quietly enjoying all of this, sitting in the VIP seats close by, watching this battle play out. But no one noticed. Under the hood, a familiar sigh came. "To be honest, I didn't plan to do this. I wanted to at least let you be my last farewell." As he spoke, he lifted the hood, revealing a face. "You, June?" Weisher was stunned for a moment, frowning. It was actually Yu Jun, who was beheaded on the first night. But no, he had already seen his corpse, which was almost rotten. Or could he have survived with only his head left? No, it wasn't Yu Jun. Even if AI Ching was silent now, Weisher could make such a judgment based on the clues she had given him before. "Who are you?" "HM, I thought you would admit your mistake like Yin Yen." June pinched his chin, raised his eyebrows slightly, and his voice became hoarse and low. To be honest, it's not polite to meet people with this face. Unfortunately, in order to make you believe that I died, my original head was also beaten up. You see, along the way, I pieced together a ship of Theseus from the Mayflower, and in the end, only my head is left. He joked leisurely, pulled up his hair slightly, and showed Huaisher the fine scars below. Huaisher was stunned. Old Shaw? Yes, it's me. Old Shaw nodded. June's expression was calm, not knowing whether it was the new head not working well, or he was always so calm and collected. You killed June? Lei Feijo and I. Old Shaw shrugged slightly. We formed an alliance on the first day on the ship, but June saw it, you know. What about Yin Yen? It was also me. Old Shaw replied frankly. To complete my secret, I needed Yaga's resurrection potion in his hands, but he refused to give it to me. Let me guess. Huaisher smiled. I'm next. Even if I don't do it, you're going to die, aren't you? Old Shaw glanced at the fragments peeling off his face with pity. To be honest, I once regarded you as my strongest competitor. After all, your performance was, well, it was amazing, almost impossible to guard against. Moreover, before this, you had the strongest lethality of all of us. An executioner of the Holy Spirit lineage was a perfect match for you. I made so many precautions against you, but I didn't expect that you couldn't even complete your own secret. As if everything was as clear as day, he calmly stated the facts. Unfortunately, Huaisher, you're going to lose this game. At that moment, Huaisher saw a black shadow fly out from under Old Shaw's broken cloak, whistling towards him like a sharp blade. In an instant, the terrifying speed was even higher than that of a vampire. Even with Huaisher's reflexes, he could not detect it. He only realized that he had been attacked by the afterimages he saw. When he lowered his head, he only saw a curled tentacle slowly retracting. And there was a big hole in his chest, between the bones that were gradually metallized. There was a tear that penetrated from his chest to his back. In an instant, all of Huaisher's defenses had been shattered by this devastating blow. Then the tentacle curled up slightly, as if it was facing a gentle breeze and drizzle, and it swept across casually, ignoring the countless bullets that were fired at it. Bang! The axe in Huaisher's hand flew out, flying in the air, and finally fell obliquely to the ground, cutting into the broken deck. And Huaisher had already flown out and smashed into the ruins. Countless cracks spread on his broken body, like porcelain that was barely glued back together after being smashed. It was about to fall apart. In the intense dizziness and trance, Huaisher heard Old Shaw's words. It was like asking and answering his own question. He slowly got up from the ground, bathed in the storm of bullets, slowly picked up June's head and put it on his neck again. It was as if he was wearing a hat. The flesh and blood closed, and no abnormalities could be seen. My mission is actually very simple. He smiled and pulled off the tattered cloak wrapped around his body, revealing the ferocious body hidden in the darkness. It's just an advancement. At that moment, his true face was revealed under the reflection of the sea of blood. Chapter 152. At that moment, his true face was revealed under the reflection of the sea of blood, on the burly body covered in thick hair. In addition to June's head, there were two other heads hidden on both sides. One of them was a ferocious banshee with countless snake hair, and the other was a sphinx that had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, there was not an inch of Lao Zhao's body that was originally his. No, it should be said that for a crowd-funded stigmata like the Stitched, there was no such thing as an original, right? But his current appearance was even more terrifying. It wasn't just Yin Yan's mystical iron boots, the Sphinx's head, and the snake-haired banshee's petrifying eyes. Behind him, There were also a few long, wriggling tails. They clearly had snake-like scales, but they had suckers that looked like octopuses' tentacles. After a long period of hiding and collecting, Lao Shao had now gathered almost all the bodies of the passengers on the ship onto himself. It was hard to say whether it was ugly or ferocious. The crudely pieced together limbs gathered on his body, and they were integrated into one without any trace of stitching. It looked so harmonious, as if they were born that way. He had completed his mission. He had successfully completed another sublimation and advanced from the original stitched. This was his secret, the mission he had to complete. Otherwise, in the sea without strong preservatives and special anti-rejection drugs, the stitched that was forcibly pieced together would not even live for a few days before it decayed and died. And now, he had successfully gotten rid of the shadow of death that was chasing after him. With the help of Jaga's magic potion and the countless limbs he had collected, he had completed the transformation and rebirth. Few people knew
After
about
the
the Sphinx was eliminated by him.
a miracle that
The Pharaoh
only
was
appeared
killed
in
by
modern
Lily,
times.
and
In
then
history,
Koth was
it
killed
was
by
unknown
Ian's
how
scheme.
many of these
The last
incomplete
person who could
and
become
remote
his enemy,
genealogies
Papaya,
had quietly
had
disappeared.
rejected the gods' attempts
Naturally,
to fool her.
no one
She
would know
chose
how
to commit
incredible the
suicide in her
advancement
madness.
of a stitched
On the other
person
hand,
was.
he had already
Chimera.
stepped over
The
piles
moment
of
he
corpses,
recognized this
completed his
advancement,
accumulation,
Why should
and widened his
breakthrough
eyes in shock
and stepped
and
into
disbelief.
the fourth stage.
Or, to put it in a
Xing'an,
more precise
even if the
and
power of the
appropriate
soul
modern term,
didn't exist in this
chimera,
game,
and he
by
couldn't
definition,
get the blessing of the
an
soul
organism is
perspective.
composed
He
of
was now
cells of different
completely different
genotypes.
from ordinary life
However,
forms.
unlike
He
the
wasn't
sutured
afraid of the
corpses or
damage
flesh
of
war
any
chariots,
ordinary
and
metal.
unlike the sutured
At best,
humans who had to face the
chemical-powered
threat of
bullets
decay
were
and
nothing
death,
more
the
than
chimeras
an
were alive,
insignificant drizzle
and they
to
were
him.
born this way,
Regardless of whether
even
it
if
was
it
his
was
extraordinary
acquired.
vitality,
It had a variety
his
of different
strength and speed
characteristics
that were almost like
and
those in horror
simply
stories,
and
or the
crudely
various
gathered
abilities that he
all
had
the
stolen from
advantages
others
into one.
They all allowed
And
him
this
to easily
miracle
wipe out
of
all of them.
reuniting the many
Now,
fragments
there was no one
into
who
one
could be
was
his
the
opponent.
true body
Amidst
of the
the
chimera,
captain's roar,
amidst
the rotating
torrential
machine
rain of
gun
metal
suddenly
that could destroy
paused,
any form of
and the
flesh
ammunition
and
chain
bones.
was emptied.
Old
There
Shao
was a
laughed
momentary
heartily
pause,
and spread his
and
arms
when everyone looked
as if
up
he was
again,
taking a bath,
Lao Shao
welcoming
had
the
already
crazy
disappeared from
firepower.
where he had been standing. He had disappeared. Not a sound was heard. Then, as if teleporting, the huge body appeared behind the captain. The captain roared and crushed his pipe. His muscles bulged as he turned around abruptly and punched the enemy behind him. However, that fist was easily wrapped up by a tentacle. Then, his other arm was crushed between the Sphinx's teeth. Then, the captain saw the head of the countless snake-haired, wriggling banshees. The captain roared and raised his head brazenly, crashing into the countless wriggling, venomous snakes. He didn't care if his face was bitten to pieces, but his movements stopped halfway. As if frozen, a stone-like grayish-white color spread across his face and covered his entire body. In front of the banshee's eyes, he turned into an angry stone statue. F***CK, you mother. At the last moment, the captain stood in front of Lily. Using all his strength, he raised his middle finger at Old Shao. The next moment, the stone statue fell apart. In the scattered dust, the dried flowers that had lost their fragrance fell into the pool of blood on the ground, crushed into mud, and disappeared without a trace. However, right after that, another cyborg picked up the axe left behind by Huaisher and rushed toward Old Shao. With all his strength, he chopped down on the snake-haired banshee's face. Several crew members pounced from behind and hugged Old Zhao's arms and legs tightly. Someone stuffed the fallen Gatling into the Sphinx's open mouth, propping up the sharp fangs. In the next moment, they were torn to pieces. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. It was like tearing a thin piece of paper. But when his broken body landed on the ground, the unconscious cyborgs still used the last of their strength to pull at his hind legs and open their mouths, trying to leave a deep bite mark on the layer of scales. In the end, Old Shao raised his foot and stomped down. In the roar, the crew's ship shook. Blazing flames and acid spewed out from his two mouths, respectively, burning the burden hanging on his body to ashes. However, even more people rushed up and blocked his path. Old Shao roared and roared against the countless people pulling at him. He charged forward angrily and crushed all the bugs in front of him. But when he looked up again, he could no longer find Lily and Huai Shi. They had escaped, but this was above the vast sea. They had no way to escape. Go forward, turn right, and climb up the ladder directly. Panting, the first mate shoved a blood-stained key into Lily's hand. There's a lifeboat hidden in the dust-proof cloth below the rear deck. You can take it and leave this place. The second mate will take you there. What about you? Come with us. Lily reached out to pull him back, but he took a step back. There was a smug expression on his burned face. No, I have my job. As long as you can survive, it's fine. He stared at the girl in front of him, slowly stepped back, and solemnly said goodbye. You have to survive and replace us. Heavy footsteps could be heard in the corridor behind them. At the last moment, the first mate looked back at the girl in the distance, smiled, and waved goodbye. The gate was closed. His roar and roar came from behind the door. Then there was no more sound. Lily did not dare to look again. She suppressed the urge to cry and ran forward. Broken cyborgs constantly bid farewell to the team and stayed behind. They disappeared amidst the shouts and roars. In the end, the second mate, who was gasping for breath, gently put Huai Shi on his back on the ground and smiled at her. I'll send you here. The thin young man hesitated for a moment and asked softly, Miss, can you hug me? Lily resisted the urge to cry and nodded vigorously. It's good. This is the taste of life. The cyborg whispered softly, gently loosened his arm, took a step back, and smiled gratefully. Live, miss, please live. This was the final goodbye. He turned around, smashed the glass cabinet next to him, pulled out a fire axe, shouted, and rushed into the cabin behind him. Lily could not hold back her tears anymore. She choked, reached out, picked up Huai Shi on the ground, and walked step by step to the lifeboat hanging behind. But as she walked, she felt that Huai Shi's breathing was getting weaker and weaker. After his pulse disappeared, his heartbeat also stopped. His breathing stopped. Huai Shi, can you hear me? She shook the vampire's shoulder in fear, but there was no response. Huai Shi lowered his head, and the fragments peeled off from his broken face. Not a sound was heard. It indifferently stared at his sorry state, watching him kneel before the altar. This is your last chance, Abraham, and the last mercy of the Holy Spirit. The old bishop looked down at him coldly, holding the scepter in his hand. He gave his last order, Abraham, kill her, and you will still be saved. In the silence, only Huai Shi's pained moans could be heard. He gasped for breath with difficulty, crawling forward in a sorry state. He stretched out his trembling hand, as if he wanted to grasp the light of nothingness and salvation. But until the end, he did not speak. Trash, you disappoint me. The bishop's face twitched and gradually turned ashen. Since you don't repent, then you and that heretic can drown in God's fury. Without a shred of sympathy, he turned and left, abandoning Huai Shi in the darkness. But immediately after, he felt a palm pressing on his shoulder. A hoarse voice sounded from behind him, close at hand. I'm sorry, Father. Unknowingly, Huai Shi had already crawled up from the ground. He lowered his head, staring at the neck that was close at hand, and said softly, Others didn't give it to me. I prefer to take it myself. At that moment, the old bishop let out a sharp scream. The vampire's fangs were already deeply nailed into his neck, frantically extracting his blood. He sucked in big mouthfuls, wantonly gorging like a hungry dog. no matter how hard he struggled, begged, or angrily rebuked. Until the end, there was no more sound. In the dead silence, Huaisher slowly opened his mouth. Then, the shriveled corpse fell on the altar. Huaisher lowered his head and stared at the terrified face of death. He slowly raised his hand and wiped away the last trace of sweet blood at the corner of his mouth. Then, he bent down and took the scepter from his hand. "Now, does anyone else have an order for me?" The young man raised his head and stared at the holy light above the vault of heaven. In the dead silence, no one spoke. So, facing the cold gazes of the gods, the rebellious vampire slowly raised the scepter in his hand and smiled happily. "Isn't it just salvation? I have it." At that moment, the holy light dissipated. The abyss collapsed. Huaisher opened his eyes and saw the pitch-black vault of heaven and the endless sea of blood. He had returned to this gloomy vault of heaven, even if he was already shattered and only bones were left. He slowly turned his head and stared at the startled girl behind him. A smile appeared on his broken face. "I'll fight for you, my lady." Boom! The chimera's tentacles swept across. Huaisher flew backwards and smashed into the mast, completely breaking it. The broken sails fell into the burning flames and burned fiercely. From the flames, the broken Huaisher crawled up like a clay doll. He lowered his head and looked at his tragic state, then raised his hand towards old Shaw, who was slowly walking over. "Wait a minute, let me flip through the book. We'll fight after I flip through it." He waved his hand and pulled out the Book of Destiny. He pathetically flipped through the records left behind by the bishop, looking for records in the fragmented handwriting. But old Shaw did not give him any chance. He stretched out his hand, and 2 tentacles flew out from his sleeves and wrapped around Huaisher's legs. He was pulled into the air and then slammed onto the deck. It was as if he was holding a hammer. All the cabins within sight were smashed into pieces. Countless fragments flew everywhere. In the end, only a silver-white skeleton was left in the ruins. Strands of golden blood flowed on the silver skeleton, slowly shining with light, as if it was embellished with an array of steel. He was actually still alive. Old Shaw frowned unhappily. The 2 heads on his shoulders suddenly opened and spewed acid and poisonous fire. They gathered into a tide and swept straight towards Huaisher. "So that's how it is?" At that moment, the broken skeleton nodded in understanding. He stretched out his hand and pulled out the solemn scepter from the Book of Destiny. He slowly raised its sharp end. He aimed it at his own chest. Stabbed down. Boom! The flames engulfed everything. But then, from the terrifying temperature that was enough to melt steel into liquid, a holy light shone from the remains of the vampire. It was as if it had turned into the sun in an instant. Endless fierce light spewed out from Huaisher's chest. It came from the scepter. It was purification. Huaisher was actually purifying himself. The holy light that was 100 times more powerful than holy water was coldly spreading over Huaisher's body. Inch by inch, it killed the vampire's dark substance and body. Old Shaw did not even need to do anything. He was simply committing suicide. But in this cold purification that did not leave any trace, Huaisher opened his hand happily and welcomed the arrival of the end. Deliberately mystifying, Old Shaw snorted coldly. In an instant, a violent wind was stirred up. He raised his fist and punched towards Huaisher's broken head. At that moment, Huaisher raised his palm. The finger bone that was bathed in the holy flame was shining brightly. It slowly unfolded and blocked the front of the beast fist. Boom! The storm, the tide, and the loud noise came to an abrupt halt in front of this palm in an instant. Old Shaw raised his head in shock. He heard the sound of steel rubbing against Huaishi's broken face. There seemed to be a seed of iron growing in that ferocious skull. It grew inch by inch from the broken skull and covered the ferocious face of the skull, turning into a solemn and cold mask. Behind the mask, a light suddenly lit up in the pair of pitch-black eye sockets. Huaishi opened his mouth, shouted, and roared. The silent sound was given substance. The blazing light turned into a torrent, gushing out from his eyes and mouth. Chapter 154. Boom. In the blink of an eye, the chimera flew backward. Plowing 2 deep fissures in the deck, Elder Shao stood firm and roared. Dozens of tentacles shot out from his body and shot towards Huaishi, who was in midair. The speed was unbelievably fast, but in the eyes of the Angel of Karma, it was surprisingly slow. Huaishi moved forward an inch. The air was torn apart by the steel body, bursting with roaring air waves. The white impact swept out and flattened the surrounding wreckage in an instant. He felt as if he had become a supersonic fighter jet. If he wanted to, he could go all out. From stillness to movement in a short instant, he reached a speed of about Mach 3. In front of such a huge speed, even the overly desolate sea and sky became narrow. Such a short gap was almost instantaneous. Like a shooting star, he descended from the sky and jumped between the countless entangling tentacles. The burning axe blade drew a sharp trace in the air. Wherever it passed, all the tentacles were shattered. Blood splattered and was immediately vaporized, and Huaishi was already close at hand. He aimed at the chimera in front of him and punched. Under the wind pressure, the mutated limbs rippled like water. When the fist arrived with a terrifying air wave and blazing temperature, the flesh and blood fell apart, revealing a pitch-black skeleton. Cracks appeared on the skeleton, but then it was repaired. Before the disintegrated flesh and blood could evaporate, new flesh and blood emerged from the wound. This time, it had evolved. The hard chitin skeleton pierced out of the body and covered Old Xiao's body. Then, as the flesh and blood wriggled, it quickly formed a buffer layer between the exoskeleton and the internal organs. In an instant, it was unrecognizable. The only thing left was a giant wrapped in pitch-black bones. This was the chimera, a rank 4 sublimator that could absolutely adapt to any environment, any battle, and any place. With such an excessive genetic reserve, Old Xiao could obtain the characteristics of any dark creature at any time and strengthen it. There was even a pair of bone wings slowly growing on his back. Soon, the flesh and blood multiplied, turning into bat-like wings covered in scales. After breaking free from the limitations of gravity, he grinned at Huaishi. The head of the banshees on his right shoulder suddenly opened her eyes and stared at Huaishi, but her gaze only had time to leave 2 lime-like dots on the back of Huaishi's raised axe. In the next moment, Huaishi disappeared on the spot. Then he appeared behind him. Old Xiao turned around in shock. Then he saw Huaishi's unfurled steel wings and her blade-like wings. He also saw the 16 flaming swords shooting out of her nostrils and a hurricane. What's the use of having wings? Are you stupid? This is my holy light jet engine. Even Huaishi himself did not King expect that the wings of the Angel of Authority had vectoring nozzles for acceleration. But when he thought about it, dozens of steel feathers suddenly fell off from his back, drawing dozens of complicated arcs in the air. With blazing light, they bombarded the chimera's body. In an instant, the bat wings were torn apart and riddled with holes. Under the bombardment of the metal feathers, several bloody holes appeared on the hard exoskeleton. The steel feathers that slowly opened up like tree branches were deeply wedged into the flesh. As they were pulled out, they brought with them a bloody whirl. It was incomparably ferocious. There are missiles too? Huaishir was stunned. Is this a F** king angel of authority or a holy light fighter? After a moment of astonishment, he abruptly retreated, increasing the distance between them. His steel wings unfurled, and flames suddenly burst forth between the sky and the sea. Hundreds of blazing rays of light gushed out from within, and the steel wings flew into the sky, whistling as they shot out, bringing with them streaks of sharp marks. They intersected with each other and turned into a storm, instantly sweeping towards the Chimera. Countless rays of light intersected in this metal storm. The surface of the sharp iron pieces was so smooth, like a mirror reflecting the bright light. From afar, it looked like a whirling hurricane of light and iron. In just an instant, the Chimera was cut into pieces. Blood spurted out and dyed the steel crimson red. The steel feathers sank deep into the bones, all over his body, causing him to roar in pain. His flesh was badly mutilated. Huaishir's face also turned pale, and he felt weak. The light was like his blood. At this moment, he was also in a state of bleeding. In a moment of carelessness, he almost forgot that his angel of authority was a pirated version. The so-called punishment for breaking an oath now seemed to be part of the sublimation. How ironic! Van Helsing probably never dreamed that the redemption he had been bitterly seeking was hidden in his body by the church, in the punishment he was incomparably resistant to and fearful of, casting a sharp light with thousands of times the darkness, and then washing away the darkness with a thunderous method to reforge a sharp blade. In the Holy Spirit lineage, the convenience of the vampire as a tool did not lie in its outstanding ability as an executioner, but also in its own cruel tempering and unimaginable soul torture. Only in this way could the most perfect fighting machine be tempered from the depths of the darkness. Angel of authority! The so-called punishment for breaking an oath was a sublimation mechanism buried in the vampire's body in advance. When the cardinals believed that a sinner had redeemed his sins and could be redeemed, or that the sinner was too useless to be destroyed, this mechanism would be activated from the inside out, quickly burning the vampire to ashes. The difference was that the consciousness of the one being redeemed would be maintained under the grace of the Holy Spirit and survive the purest burning stage. Then, under the grace of the Holy Spirit, they would rise in rank and become a fearless member of the Holy Spirit army, a saint and angel walking in the mortal world. For Huaishir, except for the punishment for breaking an oath, the other two steps were all wrong. One was maintained by Lily with her own miracle blood, and the other came from the scepter he had obtained as a traitor by backstabbing the bishop. There was no activation code for either. This kind of self-modified illegal car had to avoid the traffic police on the road, let alone replenishing fuel at the official gas station. In other words, the fuel tank was only so big, and there was only so much fuel. He had to drive leisurely. Fortunately, he at least had some experience in driving an illegal modified car. Even if he could not catch anyone, he could still drive slowly back and forth on Akina Mountain. It was a pity that such a cool flying tool could only make people feel good for a while. Huaishir regretfully shook his head and sighed. On the steel wings, the light that had been gradually dimming was reinvigorated and forcibly lit up. The burning flames set off a terrifying airflow, propelling him towards the incomplete chimera. In the air, the shining axe blade was rubbed red by the high-speed airflow, bursting with a burning glow. Boom! The steel wings crisscrossed past, dragging the axe blade as they chiseled a huge hole in the chimera's body. Yu-Jun's head flew high into the air, burning into a lump of charcoal as the wings swept past. Then, in midair, the flames spurting out from Huaishir's left wing suddenly weakened, while the flames from his right wing surged. As if being pulled by an invisible rope, it drew a dangerous arc along an axis of nothingness. After completing an almost exaggerated sharp turn, Blazing flames once again emerged from the vector nozzle, and waves of air gushed out. Huaishur turned back. Slash! This time, the chimera roared, raising its mangled left arm and smashing it towards Huaishur. Relying on its prediction of the trajectory, it launched an attack at a distance that Huaishur would not be able to dodge. In an instant, Huaishur's pupils dilated. Seeing the black shadow smashing towards his face, he subconsciously turned around in the air. Under the terrifying speed, the ailerons on his wings were raised to the limit, and the 16 vector nozzles quickly changed direction. The hurricane suddenly shook, pulling his body into a rapid spin in the air. Barrel roll maneuver. The tip of his nose almost brushed against the chimera's sweeping arm. Huaishur and Old Xiao passed by each other. The steel wings cut a deep crack in the black exoskeleton, but cracks also appeared on the wings. The chimera's blood spurted out, and in the midst of the flying blood, countless things that looked like grass seeds suddenly flew into the hurricane, being pulled into the wings by the violent airflow. They instantly expanded, spreading and growing wildly like vines. Even if they were instantly burned by the terrifying temperature, the remaining ashes blocked a few of the vector nozzles. The flames stagnated. In the air, Huaishur's movements shook. Then, he heard the sound of something breaking through the air behind him. Old Zhao's left arm had been raised in front of him at some point. In the palm of his hand, a sharp bone slowly appeared like a harpoon. Then, his left arm exploded with a loud bang. At the last moment, Huaishur saw his arm harden in an instant, as if it had turned into a cannon barrel. From the bottom, blazing flames appeared. The air instantly expanded, pushing the harpoon-like bone and pulling the rope of flesh towards him. Using a harpoon to hit an airplane? Only you could think of that. In the instant of the collision, Huaishur's left wing was pierced by the harpoon, and the barb instantly latched onto it. Then, the contracting rope of flesh pulled the chimera into the air. Fresh meat. As if it had heard the butcher's roar, a black shadow rushed up. It first threw a butcher's mark, then an E-smash, followed by a tendon break. Huaishur's vision instantly turned black. The chimera's knife-like arm had already pierced through his chest, but there was no blood spurting out from the wound. Only a ray of light leaked out. Looking at the sinister smile that was close at hand, Huaishur gritted his teeth, raised his hand, and swung the axe at the chimera's head. You've been cut into pieces, and you still dare to play the butcher. Huaishur was unable to dodge in midair, so she swung her axe down. More than half of the banshee's head was chopped off. The eyes of petrification, the most threatening part of the banshee's head, as well as the disgusting snake hair, were all chopped off and fell into the blood-red sea below. Huaishur suddenly pulled up the wing. After burning the rope of blood, he threw away the harpoon and began to soar madly upwards, trying to throw the chimera off. But the moment it pounced over, the two tentacles at Lao Zhao's tail had already wrapped tightly around his body. It was as if they had been tied together, and they refused to let go. Instead, they took the opportunity to attack Huaishur fiercely. The Sphinx's teeth suddenly opened and bit down on his neck. Bang! The metal teeth and the axe blade collided, and sparks flew. Huaishur sneered. Fine, you want me to carry you, right? Let's play in a mom and maneuver first. Chapter 155. Between the sea and the sky, the angel spewed out a dazzling golden flash as he galloped madly, without any pattern. The angel began to go all out, leaving behind a series of loud explosions. In the long flight, he actually accelerated again. After breaking through Mach 5, the hurricane that rushed at him seemed to have become knives. Sometimes he went up, sometimes he went down, and sometimes he circled or landed without any pattern. Dazzling tactical maneuvers were performed here, but he couldn't get rid of the bastard that stuck to him. He was tightly wrapped around Weischer's body, and he kept catalyzing all kinds of messy organs to attack Weischer. In the rapid flight, Weischer actually couldn't suppress his strange attacks that didn't have any pattern. In an instant, there were several holes in his body. The Holy Spirit system was really stingy. They gave him fighter jets, but they weren't willing to give him missiles. If he had a sulfur bow in hand and a few salt arrows, this bastard's head would explode from hundreds of miles away. There wouldn't be so much trouble. I've already leveled up. Why won't you just obediently die? Weischer suddenly did a barrel roll, throwing old Shao in a big circle in the air. But right after that, the chimera once again rushed up with its tentacles, and its beastly claws and sharp limbs slashed wildly at Weischer. Sparks of steel kept flying. Weischer's upward climb finally reached the peak, and he was only a short distance away from the pitch-black clouds. Intuition told him that there was an indescribably terrifying and crazy power hidden behind the clouds. If he rushed in, he definitely wouldn't have a good ending. So his speed suddenly slowed, and he began to fall. And at that moment, he heard old Shao's cold laughter. "Guess," he said softly. "Why hasn't your inspector said anything yet?" Weischer was stunned, and then he awkwardly blocked an attack from a tricky angle. "She's about to die." "Weischer!" The chimera laughed proudly. "This is all thanks to you. I'm afraid she's already dead, right? I haven't gone over to take a look, but the way he died is really quite tragic." Weischer's eyes widened in shock, and he was in a trance for a moment. His facial armor was suddenly cut open by the beast's claw, and his neck was almost bitten off by the Sphinx. "Are you stupid?" AI Ching's hoarse voice rang in his ears, weak and soft. "Are you a pig? Do you believe everything he says? Are you all right?" Weischer was overjoyed, but then he was puzzled. "What's wrong with your voice? Why do you care so much?" AI Ching raised her voice with anger that came out of nowhere. "Just don't listen to his nonsense. Are you here to chat with him?" In the midst of another collision, countless sparks flew. Weischer opened his mouth and took a deep breath. Countless rays of light surged from his mouth. Old Shao was stunned and subconsciously raised his arm to block in front of him, guarding against the flame that might be spat out next. But then he saw a trace of mockery in Weischer's shining eye sockets. Then everything went black. It was as if they had jumped from the 19th floor and hit a marble slab, and they instantly felt the pain and impact of their whole body turning into mud. They had already hit the surface of the sea, falling from a height of hundreds of meters. The surface of the water was no longer the level of marble, but the hardness of the lazurite fortress. No matter how terrifying their vitality was, under such an impact, they would be severely damaged. But Weischer was far more relaxed than him. At the moment of impact, he retracted his wings and hid behind old Shao, using his former teammate as a buffer. Even though he was knocked out of his senses and his entire body was wailing from the impact, he still looked unscathed. Unlike old Shao, who had turned into a pile of rotten meat, they bounced on the surface of the water. But then Weischer forced his wings to move in the midst of pain and dizziness. Flames erupted, taking them up again, down. Just like that, in the roar of the sea surface breaking, they rushed into the bloody deep sea. It was as if they had jumped into a pool of sulfuric acid. In an instant, even the angel of authority, who was now no longer human, felt waves of intense pain from the corrosive origin substance. Soaked in the sea water, his steel wings and body were rapidly rusting and disintegrating. What frightened him even more was that the twisted black shadows swimming in the deep sea were ferociously disturbing his countless limbs. Sensing this bit of fire, thousands of tentacles wrapped around him. Weischer only felt a bone-piercing chill. The vector nozzle suddenly changed direction and rose up. In an instant, It broke out of the sea, but to his regret, even after suffering such heavy injuries, old Shao still did not let go of his hand and held on tightly to his wings. Then he pulled with all his might. Boom! Huai Shi's left wing was pulled with all his strength, and the flames instantly dimmed. Then a tragic crack appeared. Ignoring Huai Shi's axe that was chopping down, old Shao pulled again. A steel wing covered in rust left Huai Shi's body amidst the intense pain. Their flight instantly swayed, and they staggered in midair, turned around, rose, and fell. Finally, in the violent tumble, they smashed crookedly into the body of the ship, which was covered in cracks. Amidst the rumbling, the Chimera was finally thrown down and smashed to the ground. Huai Shi staggered and rolled on top of the wreckage. He lay on the ground, panting with difficulty. Suddenly, he felt that he could not breathe. Huai Shi opened his mouth and suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. He stared at the bloodstains on his hand in astonishment. Now, he should have already become an angel of authority, aftermetal, and energy. What surged in his body was light. How could there be blood? When he lowered his head, he saw the bone dagger pierced into his chest. The dagger was hollow. As it ruptured, strands of black sludge were slowly released. They spread out amidst the surging light like a spiderweb, spreading across Huai Shi's chest. It was so familiar. Was that Kush's origin substance? When he was still a vampire, even though he could sense the evil intent surging within it, he had never personally experienced its polluting properties. No matter what, they were all on the same side of the dark creatures. And after he had transformed into an angel of authority, Kush's remaining origin substance displayed a terrifying infectious ability. It was like a nail stuck in his body, obstructing him from within. For a moment, Huai Shi actually felt dizzy, as if he had a high fever. He struggled to pull the dagger out of his chest, then raised his hand and used the red-hot axe to burn away the sludge flowing from his chest. Unfortunately, the poison still remained in his body. Panting, the angel of authority crawled up from the ground and stared at the Chimera slowly walking out of the rubble. You could even predict this. I told you, Huai Shi. Old Shao opened his mouth and spat out a metal weapon from his tail. It was covered in thick glue and a large amount of gastric acid. I made a lot of preparations. After all, KP was on my side from the very beginning. Ha 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 ha. As he laughed proudly, he reached out and tore off the glue on the weapon, revealing an ancient weapon that glowed with traces of copper green. It was a curved sickle. On the blade of the sword, there were still remnants of a golden insignia. It was the open eye of Horus, the last legacy of that useless pharaoh. You're so heartless. Huai Shi sneered indifferently, once again pulling up his heavy silver axe from the ground. I just can't carry you, and you're so arrogant, my friend. Although he only had one wing left, he could not fly. But if it was just a simple acceleration, he could still do it for the time being. In the blink of an eye, the wooden deck under Huai Shi's feet cracked. In the flames of the Vector Sphinx, the last camouflage covering the cruise ship was torn apart, revealing the true appearance of the masts and sailboats riddled with holes. The last of the hanging canvas was torn by the Angel of Heaven's advance. The steel angel broke through the air. Slash! Sword and axe collided, but immediately after, Huai Shi pulled out a short knife from behind him and mercilessly stabbed it into the Sphinx's open mouth. Blood splattered everywhere. On the sickle, the runes of the eye of Horus suddenly trembled. The bronze sickle seemed to lose its physical form in an instant and turned into a gap in the void. From the gap, in the endless light and heat, the eagle-headed god cast an indifferent glance at the mortal world. It was just a glance. Then he withdrew his gaze without interest. Huai Shi felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His vision turned black, and he was almost unable to maintain the state of the angel of authority. When the fake oracle encountered the real divine power, it was lucky that he did not explode on the spot. In his momentary weakness, the Sphinx suddenly opened his mouth, crushed the short knife in his mouth, and bit down on Sui Xiong's neck. In an instant, the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other burst forth. Under the closed teeth, the iron armor of the angel of authority cracked, and a dim light lit up from it, as if blood was flowing out. Just as the Sphinx was about to bite off Sui Xiong's neck completely, Huaisher suddenly asked softly, "What is the name of Dad's father?" The Sphinx was stunned. He seemed to be deep in thought, no matter how distant the bloodline was from the ancestor, and how weak his own strength was compared to the original. No matter which Sphinx it was, it could not resist the temptation of puzzles. This was instinct. Even in some history, there were many learned Sphinx who would accompany the pharaoh as sages and make incisive suggestions for his national politics. Unfortunately for today's idiots who only had their heads left, it took a long time to think about such a simple question. When Sui Xiong forcibly controlled it, it was already a beat too late. The axe in Huaisher's hand had already drawn an arc behind him, and with a twist of his wrist, it slammed into the Sphinx's face. The crack was deep, and blood gushed out. The scythe shook again, but this time Huaisher let go of the axe and clenched his fists. The genuine iron fists burst forth with the sound of steel, and as Huaisher waved them out, there was a roar. "Eat my Babylonian iron fist." The silver axe did not fall to the ground. A left hook, a right hook, and an uppercut after executing a full set of Roman martial arts moves, and with the flames spurting out from his wings, a holy iron fist smashed into Old Zhao's face. Old Zhao's neck whimpered, and the faint sound of his skull cracking could be heard. Huaisher had already caught the axe falling from the air and swept it across, blocking the delayed light on the blade. The eye of Horus opened, and then saw nothing, so he closed his eyes again. Huaisher had already moved forward, his footsteps shattering the deck, and his shoulder slammed forward, knocking the chimera back a step. He raised the silver axe, and holy light burst forth. Then he slashed at the Sphinx's head. Chapter 156. Cracks spread from the silver axe, and the scythe amidst the roar of the collision. The broken axe blade flew out, and the eye of Horus on the scythe also shattered. In that instant, Old Zhao roared. The two of them threw away the broken weapons in their hands at the same time, raised their fists again, and slammed them together. Amidst the chimera's roar, Huaisher abruptly dodged the fist that was sweeping towards her. Then she raised her 5 fingers and jabbed at the chimera's throat, blocking the roar back down. Then, as his wrist contracted, his 5 fingers suddenly clenched into a fist. He charged forward again, smashing the Sphinx's head with a roar. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This time, the fragile skull could no longer withstand the bombardment of this punch. It shattered with a dull sound, and the last head was about to be destroyed. But right after that, Huaisher suddenly trembled and bent over involuntarily. She saw the chimera's long tail smashing into her abdomen like a hammer. It was almost as if the chimera's tail was trying to break through steel, causing cracks to spread. He staggered backward and gasped for breath. Then he and Old Zhao pounced forward at the same time. The battle began again. This time, it was no longer a battle between swords and sabers and flying between the sea and the sky, but a face-to-face battle. After discarding all the irrelevant elements, they returned to the realm of beasts. Bones were broken, blood was washed. Every time they collided, stomped their feet, and punched, there would be a roar. The wailing sailboat was constantly shaking and cracking, and thick smoke rose from the burning flames. The ashes fell on the broken armor of the Angel of Authority, and the light in Huaishi's eyes gradually flickered and dimmed. In the violent battle, the endless power seemed to have been squandered away, and it was difficult to resist the fierce poison of the dark elemental substance. Under the armor, he gradually recovered the senses of flesh and blood. He felt the tearing pain, as well as dizziness and fatigue. But the other side was not much better. The two eyesore tails had been completely torn off by Huaishi, and the last head of the Sphinx had been smashed to pieces by Huaishi. Punches, punches, and punches again. Amidst the rumbling sounds, the Archangel of Power was like a machine that did not know fatigue, forcefully shaking the Chimera's torrential winds and torrential rains, before using violence to counter violence with an iron fist. Amidst the dull sound, the exoskeleton in front of the Chimera's chest was completely shattered, revealing the devastation within. Old Xiao staggered and took a step back. However, Huaishi continued to advance. Once again, he raised his fist and smashed out. Bang! Come on! Huaishi roared and stepped forward, pressing forward step by step. He waved his hand to wipe away the blood on the back of his hand and clenched it again. The sound of steel rubbing against each other was so ferocious. Haven't you made a lot of preparations? Take it out, Old Xiao. Let's see how you can win. Ha, 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 ha. The Chimera seemed to be amused by Huaishi's words. It clutched its stomach and laughed, unable to contain its joy. Even if Huaishi pulled him up and punched him again and again, smashing him into the ruins of the bridge. You really? Bang! He suddenly reached out and grabbed Huaishi's iron fist. He slowly clenched his fist and smiled savagely. You don't know anything. A loud explosion rang out. As the beast's arms danced, Huaishi was pulled into the air. He smashed through the floorboards and fell into the lower level of the cabin. Immediately afterwards, however, the Chimera raised its foot and stomped down on his face. Huaishi rolled, dodged, and crawled to his feet, panting violently. He felt waves of dizziness, and his vision darkened. However, what made him uneasy was Ai Qing's silence and the burning pain in his skull. This was the punishment for breaking his oath. Even though the chains on his body had been shattered, the principles and commandments of the origin substance still existed. At this moment, as he weakened, they appeared once again, tormenting his soul. Like cold steel, they struck him again and again, shaking his consciousness and causing his vision to darken. Guess why? Sure. Old Xiao roared and swung his fist, sending him flying. Guess why Yaka went crazy? Huaishi retreated, his feet leaving 2 deep marks on the broken deck. Guess. He roared angrily again. When Ko Sish felt that he was about to die, he went crazy and tried to kill an entire ship of people. Boom. Huaishi was smashed into the wall. Guess again. Why? The more people die on this ship, the faster it will die. He laughed savagely, then raised his foot and kicked forward. A terrifying force burst forth, causing Huaishi to break through several layers of the cabin's floorboards and be wedged into the wall. Finally, guess, he slowly bent down and picked up Huaishi's broken axe from the ground. He staggered forward with a malicious and ferocious smile on his face. It's only been a night's journey, but why haven't we seen the so-called New World yet? Old Xiao looked down at Huaishi's broken face and shook his head in disappointment. He slowly raised the axe and swung it down. The blade of the axe stopped abruptly in front of Huaishi's eyes. The end of the handle was suddenly grasped by a hand, unable to move an inch forward. You're using my axe to chop me? Huaishi slowly raised his head and stared at the hideous face. Who gave you the confidence? The sound of steel rubbing against each other burst forth. The blade of the axe retreated upwards. It moved away inch by inch between Huaishi's raised fingers. In his dizziness and pain, Huaishi roared. He suddenly raised his hand, clenched it, and smashed it into Old Zhao's face. Then he punched again and again, until that broken face was smashed into a bloody mess by him. Finally, he clenched his fist with all his might. He swung it. With a roar, the chimera flew out. After smashing through the cabin, it landed on the deck, which was riddled with holes, and fell into the flames. Huai-Shi gasped for breath as she crawled up from the ground. Dragging her axe, she climbed up step by step and crawled out. In the end, he saw the enemy lying on the ground. It seemed that he had no strength left. He leaned against the broken rail and opened his eyes with difficulty. He looked at Huai-Shi, who was walking towards him step by step. For some reason, he couldn't help but laugh hoarsely. "Did you think of a joke?" Huai-Shi asked indifferently. "Why don't you say it so that everyone can listen to it? Isn't the one in front of me a joke?" Old Zhao panted and smiled mockingly at him. "How ironic, Huai-Shi. It was destined from the beginning. Only you can't win." "Ha ha ha ha," he said. "You can kill me, but you can't escape that curse." In his dizziness, Huai-Shi felt a sharp pain in his head. He staggered and gritted his teeth angrily. He stepped forward and asked hoarsely, "A ridiculous joke? Are these your last words?" "Is that so?" Old Zhao raised his head and spat out a mouthful of black blood. He sneered. "Do you want to make it clearer? Huai-Shi? Or why don't you ask Ai Qing?" Ai Qing didn't say anything. She lowered her eyes. "Do you see?" Old Zhao sneered. "You're the only one who is kept in the dark. No, there's one more." He stared maliciously at the pale girl behind Huai-Shi. "Give up, Huai-Shi." Old Zhao shook his head and said mockingly, "No matter how hard you struggle, you can't change the final result. Is it because my question is not simple enough, or you don't want to get the result from thinking?" "It was destined from the beginning." He laughed out loud. "On this ship, there can only be one person who can reach the new world." This was the truth behind Ai Qing's silence. The gods finally made a contract in the struggle and made a compromise after all kinds of intense or secret probing. The gods could cruelly punish these traitors, and the White Crown King was not generous. He didn't want homeless dogs and frustrated losers who only knew how to tuck their tails between their legs. The obstacles and curses of the gods were exactly what he wanted. Only in such a cruel and cold way could the fugitives completely extinguish their unrealistic delusions and face the cold reality and the tragic battle. From the beginning, this ship was not the ideal home of the fugitives. It was a big cauldron that smelted the miraculous gold from the dregs and waste. He would choose one winner from 100 losers. He would choose a true powerhouse from the countless abandoned dust. He would choose someone who could truly help him accomplish his great cause. This was the curse and blessing of the White Crown King. Among all the sinners on this ship, only one person would be pardoned by the White Crown King. Only one. When the Mayflower set sail, the final result was already destined. Nothing could be avoided. Everything that happened later was just a step toward the predetermined ending. It was just to welcome the final winner. At the moment of realization, Huai-Shi felt a sharp pain in his skull like erupting lava. He almost couldn't stand still. Violent waves reverberated in his source substance. It was as if an iron pen fell, engraving an order that couldn't be disobeyed in his soul stroke by stroke. It made him tremble and roar tragically. "Do you finally understand? Huai-Shi? Then, finally, let's guess." He laughed strangely and whispered softly, "Whose philosopher's stone recorded this part of history?" At that moment, Huai-Shi roared and slashed down with his axe. It completely chopped off his dog's head. The broken head rolled on the ground, and the last mocking smile still remained. Everything of Paracelsus will be buried here. The broken head raised its eyes from the blood, and its lips opened and closed silently. It stared pitifully at Why Sure and Lily in front of it. She died in your hands. Abraham Van Helsing, don't forget, this is your mission. He closed his eyes. Under the blade of Why Sure's axe, it fell apart. In the gradually cold hand of the corpse, the 5 fingers slowly spread out, revealing the scratched Wanderer coin. On the coin, the holy statue of the archangel stared indifferently at Why Sure's face with a mocking smile. Why Sure fell to the ground powerlessly, no longer able to hold the axe. Countless voices echoed in his ears like thunder or soft whispers. The voices of thousands of people overlapped in his consciousness, giving him a mission that couldn't be disobeyed. Kill Paracelsus. Kill Lily. This was the mission that Van Helsing had to complete. This was the ending left in the Philosopher's Stone. This was everything that you had done with your own hands. At that moment, Why Sure came to a realization from the pain of his soul being torn apart. He couldn't help but laugh. He laughed at himself when he tried his best to pick up the gun on the ground and slowly got up from the ground. His eyes became unfamiliar. It was as if he had woken up from a long dream. Lily stared at him blankly for a long, long time. She seemed to finally understand something, but her pale face still had a sad confusion. So, you came to kill me, Why Sure? Yes. Why Sure nodded, enduring the pain in his skull, and his face gradually became ferocious. He slowly raised the pistol. He aimed at the girl's face. It shattered her last hope, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Why on earth? She choked and shouted. I just want to live. Why Sure didn't answer. He just stared silently at her crying face. After a long time, he sighed softly. Yes, why is it so difficult to just want a happy life? He said, probably this world is like this. From the beginning, it was shrouded in the shadow of hell. Freedom was just a fleeting illusion, and the humble life was the currency at the fingertips of the gods. In such a world, how could there be any happiness to pursue? Why Sure's eyes drooped as she felt something within her body crumbling apart. Sorry, I lied to you, he murmured softly. This was his final farewell and apology. Since this game was destined to end from the very beginning, it was time for it to end. Thus, the warmth of the past was no longer there. Why Sure pulled the trigger. Chapter 157. At that moment, everything was silent. Then a violent roar engulfed everything. When the roar dissipated, Huaisher lowered his eyes and saw the blood on the ground, the dagger in his chest, and the crying Lily. "Oh, I missed. What a pity." Staring at the stunned face, Huaisher raised her eyebrows in delight. She chuckled softly, as if regretfully, and lowered her eyes. He knelt on the ground powerlessly. Lily looked at him blankly, as if she wanted to say something. Blood fell on her face. Her lips opened, but she couldn't speak. "I'm sorry, I can't accompany you on your trip." Huaisher leaned on her shoulder, panted, and whispered softly. Lily looked at him blankly and couldn't help but wail. She reached out, wanting to save him, but Huaisher held her hand tightly. It was deadly. Huaisher raised his head, looked at her face, and forced her to look into his eyes. "Listen to me, Lily, from today onwards, you have to learn to be alone." He tried his best to breathe, and told her, "When you arrive in the new world, you have to start living alone, working alone, and traveling alone. You will embrace your own fate and future, face the storms of the future alone. And in the end, you may die quietly alone. But you can't be afraid, and you can't run away." Huaisher stroked the girl's cheek, stared at her crying eyes, and whispered, "Because you are not alone, so you have to have courage." He slowly raised his hand and gently hugged Lily's shoulder, using all his strength. "Goodbye, Lily." He said goodbye. "Goodbye, my friend. Thank you for your company. Thank you for everything you did for me. Thank you for the hug." When he raised his eyes, he saw the broken dark clouds in the sky, as well as the twinkling stars under the bright moon. The blood color of the quiet sea dissipated, and a gentle and warm, fresh wind came out. At the end of the sea, the outline of the continent and the mountains faintly appeared. Their trip had arrived at the main point. The short journey was about to come to an end. He smiled, closed his eyes, and exhaled his last breath. "I wish you a safe journey." "Why didn't you stop him?" KP looked down at the final scene and sighed softly. "I thought you would at least let him kill the girl. After all, this is just a game." "Yes, this is just a game." AI Ching calmly lit the cigarette in the corner of her mouth. "Unfortunately, I prefer this ending." As she spoke, she replaced Huaisher and raised her middle finger at KP, telling him one word at a time. "You're the one who's going to die. F*CK, your game." KP calmly accepted the anger and contempt from AI Ching and Huaisher. He calmly closed the rule book in his hand, took off the glasses on his face, and shook his head slightly. "Should I say that it's inconceivable or natural? You actually made the same choice as in the previous round. If the first time was a coincidence, then the second time can't be described as a coincidence." He paused for a moment and nodded solemnly to AI Ching. "Your determination and will are admirable, Ms. AI. Your respect for the story also surprised me. I have to admit that I underestimated you." "Can such beautiful words change the ending?" AI Ching stubbed out the cigarette and looked up at him. "If you want to do something, do it quickly. Don't think about listening to me beg for mercy." "No, I think you misunderstood something." KP stared at the screen in the game and smiled. "The game is not over yet. After all, everything that has happened now is not allowed by someone." At his fingertips, a chess piece overflowing with deep blood color appeared and was slowly placed on the table. At that moment, in the darkness, a cold eye opened. Ending error. Fallacy in the third branch. Deviation in the logical direction. Begin correction. Correction failed. Problem report uploaded. Central core analysis begins. Analysis complete. Beginning correction. Thus time stopped abruptly in an instant. In the darkness of death, Huaisher opened her eyes, and heard countless roars and shouts. In the end, they turned into a thunderous roar that exploded in her soul. Rebellion! 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 As if there was a substantial thunder falling from the sky, it penetrated his soul. Some kind of rigid and resolute power operated in his consciousness and began to search for the seeds of rebellion and correct the wrong thoughts. Everything that had happened now was reversed and together with time. At that moment, Huaishur opened his eyes in severe pain and peeked into the depths of the layers of darkness. There was a thin figure standing in the darkness with a pair of blood-red eyes. It was so familiar. It was the Philosopher's Stone that recorded all of this, the memories left by the former Van Helsing. In the original history, Van Helsing chose to kill the woman who trusted him and successfully passed the test to reach the New World. In the end, he joined the American genealogy and became a shameful traitor. In the silence, KP slowly said, after 270 years, he almost exiled himself and devoted himself to the cause of opening up hell. Even when he advanced to the Fifth Order Blue Crown Dragon, he never returned to the present realm, as if he was escaping something. Until he died of old age in the 21st level of hell, there was not a day when he did not regret the choice he made that day. There was not a day when he did not repent for that pure and sad soul. This is the original sin he committed in order to be reborn, an unchangeable fact. He lowered his eyes in pity and sighed softly. Just like that, with deep regret, he died, leaving this record in the Philosopher's Stone. So I'm sorry, Ms. AI. He slowly shook his head. This is the established history, the destined fate of him and her, the determined ending of this story. The remorse and sorrow of countless times in the past was now only a remnant of a huge obsession. It forgot why it existed and what had happened in the past. It was just like a machine, repeating everything in the past over and over again, witnessing this eternal original sin. It was because of this that no change was allowed, and all the endings could not be forgiven for being destroyed. Kill, Paracelsus. The vampire stared at Huaishur's eyes, and a violent power poured into his soul. The huge will shook in the void and burst out with blazing electric light, changing Huaishur's will inch by inch. Complete your mission. A thunderous roar of rage reverberated in his soul. Kill her and obtain your redemption. F*CK, your redemption. At that moment, Huaishur raised his eyes from the turmoil of his soul, even though his eyes had been scorched by the crazy electric light and were spewing out flames. The modification of the will came to an abrupt end. In front of the thick book, countless huge wills collapsed like waves crashing on a reef. Huaishur roared angrily. She went against the imposing gaze coming from the darkness and moved forward. He stretched out his hand and suddenly stuck it in the darkness. It was as if he was pulling back time, causing the reverse time to stagnate. The record shook, but then it came to an abrupt end. It was forced into a stagnation under his will. Huaishur reached out and pulled up the vampire's collar. His charred eyes stared at the vampire's empty face and told him word by word, "I don't want this kind of redemption." The vampire's illusion shattered with a loud bang. "You're going to lose, KP." At that moment, at the front of the audience, Crow calmly made the final judgment. KP looked up in astonishment and saw the cracks on the chess piece. This was a contradiction from the inside out, and it was also an incredible discovery. Van Helsing's record was defying his Philosopher's Stone. His history was defying his will. This story abandoned its original master. Then it chose a new protagonist and stood beside Huaishur. Then the earth shook, the world roared, and everything that had stagnated began to move in a new direction, toward a new ending, resisting the will that was constantly exerting heavy pressure, resisting the power of the Philosopher's Stone. Boom! Huaisher's soul shook violently and cracks appeared. He stretched out his hand and suddenly pierced into the void. He found the original ending from the countless broken records and suddenly clenched it as if he was holding a piece of red-hot iron. He didn't care that his soul was collapsing. Then he saw the girl who had fallen in a pool of blood due to her destined fate, and her eyes that slowly closed in sorrow. She was dead. Such an ending, Huaisher announced hoarsely, "I won't allow it." Even if this was real history, even if all of this could no longer be changed, even if it was a dream in all of this fiction, there should be a place for her in this world. Then, under KP's stunned expression, he roared and completely tore the original ending to shreds, together with layers of darkness. He pulled open a crack in the countless records and glimpsed the enormous will that operated behind them. It shook angrily and set off a howling counterattack. And Huaisher, in a daze, stretched out his hand and tightly grasped the void in front of him. Then a metallic light burst forth from his fingertips. The light, as sharp as the stars, gathered in his hand and multiplied inch by inch. In an instant, it formed a slender and ferocious cross-shaped spear. Surging origin substance flowed on its blade, interweaving into a gorgeous and complicated pattern. With his command, it burst forth with the brilliance of the scorching sun. From the darkness, Huaisher stepped forward, raised his arm, and stabbed out with a soundless roar. With this attack, the final ending was decided. Let the dust settle. Bang! A dream, an illusion, a bubble. Everything dissipated. In a daze, Huaisher heard the sound of something shattering. When countless lights and shadows flitted past in front of him, he had already returned to the cabin that seemed familiar to him. His hand held the slender iron, still maintaining the posture of a lunge. In front of him, in the open safe, the philosopher's stone that was as resplendent as a dream had already been pierced through by the spear's blade. Light green blood flowed out from the enormous crystal-like pupil. The crack spread. The philosopher's stone silently shattered. In the deathly stillness, Huaisher forced a smile and fell to the ground. He was unconscious. In a daze, he seemed to have heard the sound of something shattering. In the deep night, the swaying lifeboat drifted between the waves. Lily turned her head in astonishment, searching for the source of the sound. There, the sailboat that was riddled with holes was swallowed up by the flames, gradually sinking into the turbulent waves. But at a certain moment, she seemed to see the shadow of a youth at the bow of the boat. He happily waved goodbye to her, turned around, and walked into the rising flames. He disappeared. Only the faint sound of a cello could be heard from the flames. It was gentle and low, dancing under the waves and starlight. It was as beautiful as the creation of a soul. Huaisher, the girl, stared blankly at the gradually extinguishing flames. After a long, long time, she weakly curled up on the boat and cried, just like a newborn baby. In the distance, the faint light of dawn shone, illuminating the land of the new continent. Her life had officially begun. Chapter 158. In KP's silence, the game came to an end. A thick book jumped out from the light and opened in front of him and Crow. Countless pages flipped and finally stopped at the blank space at the end of the scroll. A silver feather pen jumped on the page, ignoring KP's astonishment, and left a line of dark words, announcing the end. False end. Empty ending. No person survived. KP looked down at the line of words and was stunned. Oh, really, isn't that too rude? Crow laughed happily. Not long ago, I felt that this child had the potential to become a villain. I didn't expect him to improve so quickly. As she spoke, she raised her eyes and stared at her former colleagues in front of her. So, how do you feel, hosts? She asked softly. Is my clerk still worthy of your attention? Is he the kind of recorder you are looking for? Is he someone who can treat the past and the future equally, adjudicate record and reality, and balance fiction and truth? Wonderful, KP whispered softly. Wonderful. He finally raised his eyes, but there was no annoyance or unhappiness in them. Instead, they were full of surprise and excitement, sparkling, wonderful. This is a legendary performance. Legendary. Behind him, a woman in a black robe appeared. She nodded slightly, but did not hide her admiration, a hero destined by the heavens. On the other empty chair beside the table, an old man with a solemn face raised his deep eyes and said in a low voice, "What an admirable feat!" Thus, Crow nodded in satisfaction and rubbed her little wings. "Then, let's discuss the next thing. For example, compensation." When Weisher opened his eyes from his drowsiness, he felt as if he was going to die from exhaustion. It was as uncomfortable as being beaten up by 100,000 people after running 100,000 marathons with a hangover. Who am I? Where am I? What happened? Then he saw Old Shaw grinning in front of him. "Not bad, kid." The rough man patted him on the shoulder. "Not bad." Weisher jumped out of bed in fright and almost knocked over the foredrip hanging on his body. He almost lost control and chopped down with his axe. Wake up, wake up. It's all over." Old Shao coughed awkwardly and turned to look at his supervisor, the smiling old man. "What are you waiting for? Come and explain yourself. Look at what you've done in my face. If I had known, I wouldn't have come. What happened?" Weisher was dumbfounded. He saw AI Ching sitting at the table with a gloomy face, and KP, who was smiling and playing dice across the table. Cough, cough. To put it simply, this is an impromptu inspection. The old inspector coughed twice and said, "Under Mr. KP's suggestion, we will use the recovery of the Philosopher's Stone as a test." "What?" Weisher was dumbfounded. "This was all arranged by you? Although there were some unpleasant accidents, some of them." Yes." The old inspector, who played the role of Old Shao in the module, smiled awkwardly and reached out his hand. "Please forgive us for offending you." Weisher was dumbfounded. He looked at AI Ching, trying to figure out what was going on. AI Ching's expression was still ugly. To put it simply, the operation was a test from the beginning. Both of us were played in circles. Even the examiner himself almost failed. "Don't say that, Miss AI. Although there were many accidents, this is still an inspection for you and Mr. Y." The old inspector coughed awkwardly and looked away. "What accident?" "It's a long story." The old inspector pondered for a moment and sighed helplessly. In fact, at the beginning, there was no module or game. According to the original plan, everyone raided the smuggler's cargo ship. Wu Shuang had a great time, but no one expected that when they were about to successfully recover the Philosopher's Stone fragment, a traitor would suddenly stab them in the back. Lei Feizhou, under the instructions of his inspector, they were prepared to steal the Philosopher's Stone fragment and run away, hiding at the border to dispose of the stolen goods. In the beginning, the stab went very smoothly until they tried to stab Weisher in the back. Things went wrong. According to the inspector's description, Weisher, who understood the situation, displayed a terrifying reaction speed. Relying on his killing skills, he fought guerrilla warfare on the ship, displaying a terrifying combat strength beyond imagination. In a short 15 minutes, Lei Feizhou and the 4 ascendant companions he had contacted were all dealt with as easily as chopping vegetables. In the end, Lei Feizhou was driven to desperation and directly activated the Philosopher's Stone fragment, triggering a large-scale corrosion phenomenon, leading to unknown consequences. Helpless, KP could only use some method to forcibly erase this incident and start over. This was the first cycle. However, the philosopher's stone fragment had already completely corroded the surroundings, turning the ship and the surrounding area into an ever-expanding hell. The difficulty of recovery soared to a terrifying level, and the second cycle of recovery failed. The Astronomy Association had no choice but to agree with KP's suggestion, covering the area with the dark net border, forcibly modularizing everything, and then started the third cycle. The scheming and fighting of this story could easily fill up 200,000 words in the Book of Destiny. Huaishur felt extremely regretful after hearing it. Why was it omitted? However, he still felt that there was something wrong. When he subconsciously looked at KP only smiled mysteriously and didn't say anything. Instead, KP secretly winked at him when no one was paying attention. After explaining to Huaishur, the old inspector said seriously, "Madam AI, during the inspection, you have shown the qualities of an inspector. You have a keen sense of thinking and smell, as well as the deep trust between you and your colleagues, as well as the calmness and decisiveness in the face of adversity. The Central Administration praised your performance and approved your promotion application, and once again invited you to join the Central Decision-Making Conference. I already said, I refuse." AI Ching indifferently interrupted him. "Cut the crap. I hope we'll meet again at the internal meeting. Okay, I hope you'll be merciful at that time." The old inspector smiled helplessly and looked at Huaishur seriously. "As for you, Mr. Huai, you've successfully completed the mission I expected to be impossible. Moreover, you have the integrity and outstanding skills that are rarely seen in this era. Although your thinking is a bit simple and you have a tendency to be overly violent, this can't hide your outstanding talent. The Astronomy Association is proud to have an operation member like you. This is your official certificate. We will complete the registration later. If you have time in the next few months, you can come to Jinling to register." Pfft! In the corner, Yin Yen snorted in disdain. When he noticed Huaishur's gaze, he unhappily retracted his gaze. He continued to shrink. "Mr. Yin Yen has been temporarily disqualified as an inspector because of his behavior of endangering colleagues during the operation. Your inquiry will be held in Jinling later. Please pay attention to the notice." The old inspector shook his head in pity. After filling out the form in his hand, he handed Huaishur a new certificate. "Then my mission is complete." He put away the things in his hands with a smile and bid farewell to the others. Soon, only he and AI Ching were left in the room. I was completely fooled. AI Ching sighed unwillingly. She tapped on the armrest with a gloomy expression and closed her eyes. In the silence, Huaishur awkwardly coughed twice. AI Ching, yeah?" AI Ching looked up at him. She was still angry. Thank you. Although I don't know what you encountered, I really have to thank you." Huaishur solemnly nodded and thanked her. Isn't it the job of an inspector to leave the operation to the subordinates and bear the consequences yourself? AI Ching looked at him and looked away with disinterest. "I'm going out to get some fresh air. You have a good rest. A boat will pick us up later." Okay. Before leaving, AI Ching's wheelchair paused for a moment. She was silent for a long time before she sighed. Helplessly, she turned around and said, "You did a good job." "Yeah." Without explaining anything, AI Ching pushed the door open and left him alone in the room. In the silence, Huaishur turned around and saw KP, who had reappeared behind the table. "You're leaving already?" KP raised his eyebrows, shook his head, and sighed. What a straightforward girl. It must be hard to have such a boss. "Actually, it's okay." Huaishur scratched his head and looked at him awkwardly. After a long time, he couldn't help but ask, was it really just a test? It was a part of it. At least, that's what they thought. KP shrugged. Don't worry. They just hitched a ride. I kept the key parts a secret for you. Thank you. Huaisher nodded and looked at the small box on the table in front of him. The transparent box contained a broken crystal ball. It was exquisitely carved like an eye. That was the fragment of the philosopher's stone. Unfortunately, more than half of the miracles in it had been lost. It was no longer useful. Don't worry about it. Anyway, it was mostly consumed to maintain that module. Compared to what we gained, what we lost is not worth mentioning. KP comforted him understandingly. Then he raised his eyebrows and clapped his hands happily. Then, as good friends of the investigator, we will enter the stage of the day after tomorrow and the stage of growth. Although you didn't successfully clear the module, you completed an unexpected ending. As the master of this game, I must give you a reward. There's a reward. Huaisher was stunned. Of course, KP said matter-of-factly. The original reward for clearing the module was this character card. As long as you have enough source substance, you can transform into Van Helsing's character again for a short time. But to be honest, I feel that this meager reward can't recognize everything you've done. As he spoke, he tore Van Helsing's character card into pieces without any hesitation. What the hell? Wait a minute. Huaisher was dumbfounded. He originally wanted to say that it didn't matter and that he didn't mind if KP quickly gave it to him, but he didn't expect KP to act so quickly. That was a border relic that, as long as there was enough source substance, would allow a person to instantly transform into a peak stage 3 ascendant, and it was only 1 step away from becoming an angel of authority. In other words, as long as Huaisher had enough, he could transform into a holy light fighter at any time. How could he tear it apart just like that? Anyway, let's put this matter aside for now. Let's roll the screen. Reward first. KP took out a thick rule book and explained the meaning to Huaisher. It seemed that in this game, as long as a player completed a module, his character would be able to grow and obtain a skill reward. But according to KP, this reward could actually be placed directly on him, a free skill upgrade. Huaisher's eyes lit up with excitement. Following KP's guidance, he began to roll the die for judgment. Soon, his face became incomparably dark, and he was lost in the blue sky of Africa, dumbfounded. Bluff, persuasion, and stealth. These were skills that had been successful in the module, but one by one they had failed to grow. After rolling around, only the most basic listen and detect were upgraded. Soon, as the die rolled, Huaisher only felt his eyes light up, and the world seemed to instantly become much clearer. Countless tiny traces that he had overlooked were vivid in front of his eyes, and his ears could even hear the rustling of the clothes of those people outside the cabin, as well as the low echoes of the surging waves like a symphony. His perception, which had been raised to the limit by the ghost, actually increased by a large margin. Just this alone was a pleasant surprise. But then, when he rolled the die for the last time, a large amount of knowledge unexpectedly emerged in his mind about the properties of various metals, the methods to process them, and the details to pay attention to in each process. Originally, he had only memorized the information and knowledge from so many books, but at this moment, he had unexpectedly mastered it through a comprehensive study. And the various details and key points mentioned by Crow when he was teaching were also vivid in his mind. Alchemy's growth test passed. In an instant, he had gone through a long period of repeatedly memorizing, unceasingly, and futilely trying and experimenting to slowly master the stage, and he had officially become a beginner. When he raised his palm and focused his mind, he glimpsed countless fine metal fragments floating in the air above his palm. The pure white alchemy fire rose up, the temperature flexibly changing, quickly melting, refining, purifying, extracting, and even synthesizing them, until finally it turned into a surging silver-white liquid. A small miracle had happened. Silver blood potion. Although the potion's effect was slightly weak, Weisher had already skipped the long period of apprenticeship in one fell swoop, only relying on his hands to complete the results that were previously unreachable. Just when he was pleasantly surprised, he heard KP excitedly snap his fingers in contemplation. It was like a flash of inspiration. "I got it!" KP happily raised his eyes. "This is the most suitable reward for you." Just when Weisher raised his head in amazement, he saw KP stretch out his hand towards him from afar, as if he had grabbed something and pulled it back. Weisher's brain suddenly buzzed, as if something had been pulled out from his soul by KP. When he raised his eyes to look, he found that KP had a gorgeous cross-shaped spear in his hand. The silver-white spear blade was engraved with layers of complicated emblems, exquisite and solemn, as if it had gathered all the light in the world. The spear of compassion? KP lowered his head and stared at the inscriptions on the spear, nodding in admiration. "Good name." As he said that, he reached out and picked up the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone on the table, the repenting eye that once belonged to the Fifth Order Sublimata, Blue-Crowned Dragon Van Helsing. The crystal eye in his hand turned into a stream of light, adhering to the spear blade. It illuminated KP's smile. "Let's use this to commemorate your dragon-slaying feat." At that moment, the light dissipated from the spear blade, and on the silver-white blade, there was an additional trace of blood that had yet to dry. The seemingly endless blood of the azure-crowned dragon slowly dripped from the tip of the spear and landed on the ground. The ground silently decayed, and soon after, pure white irises bloomed from the decaying ground. It emitted a refreshing fragrance, defeating evil, subverting fate, and saving the princess trapped in the endless cycle of death. Your actions are the embodiment of glory. KP smiled, looking at the magnificent spear. From 1620 to now, such a long time has been pierced through by this spear. This is the proof of an immortal legend. As he said that, he turned the spear around, elegantly and solemnly holding it in front of Weisher. Weisher slowly reached out and held the handle of the spear. With a thought, the gorgeous cross-shaped spear shrunk inch by inch, turning into an ancient book in his hand. When he lowered his head to look at it, he saw the ancient title on the cover that had weathered the passage of time. 400 years of shock. He was stunned. KP, with the last glimmer of hope, he stared at the man in front of him. Is Lily really still alive? Who knows? KP smiled mysteriously. The life and death of a human is like morning dew and bubbles, and the life and death of an android is even more illusory. Moreover, isn't she a person who won't appear in the world? An illusory life, an ethereal death, it is difficult to define. But is that real, or is reality and illusion really that important? KP said calmly, "I believe that no matter what it is, you will treat it equally, always the same. And that is enough. I am sincerely grateful for your tolerance and generosity." As he said that, he took a step back and took off his hat and coat from the shelf next to him. "Then, Mr. Weisher, allow me to say goodbye here." KP bowed solemnly. "I sincerely hope that one day you and Miss Lily can meet again in this dreamlike world." He paused for a moment and smiled meaningfully. "Until then, please wait and hope." In the silence, KP turned and left. The door closed. Weisher looked at the ancient book in his hand in a daze. Is this the end of the story? Maybe. Chapter 159. 400 years ago, in the New World, under the gloomy sky, a dim light shone through the gaps between the clouds, illuminating the gray waves in front of the reef. Countless sharp reefs protruded from the shore into the sky in a disorderly manner. They were as sharp as blades, cutting the waves that surged up again and again. broken rails and charred sails floated up from the broken waves. Countless pieces of debris washed up to the shore. Half buried in the sand, more were taken away by the waves again. They disappeared into the deep sea. In the silence, there was a thin figure standing quietly on the shore, like a stone statue, waiting silently. It was difficult to see his face, because his face was too handsome, and the light of the world could not illuminate it. He did not know how to look at the robe on his body, because the robe was too solemn, and his eyes could not bear it. The only thing generously revealed between the sea and the sky was the cold and solemn white crown on his head. It was like the truth, like a miracle, like everything inconceivable. It existed here, and it was real. Then everything was like a dream, and it was difficult to show one's substance in front of it. One could only admit one's insignificance and humility in this seemingly eternal wait. The lonely king of the white crown stood silently on the edge of the sea, quietly staring into the distance, watching countless ships sailing in the stormy waves, countless people chanting their names, countless people shouting in despair or piously praying. But he did not help them because of their piety, nor did he punish them because of their rebellion and arrogance. He just waited. Amidst the murky waves, a few broken sampans staggered forward and crawled pathetically to the shore. The victims soaked in the water were pale, holding the reef in front of them with difficulty, crawling on the sharp edge, letting their bodies be cut, gasping for breath. They looked sadly behind them. The huge fleet stopped on the surface of the sea, the raging fire burning vigorously, and tragic screams and wails could be heard. After a long, long time, they all sank to the point where they were only one step away from salvation. The old survivors lowered their heads, and tears flowed down, their faces behind mottled white hair, but they did not dare to look. Instead, they lowered their heads and knelt in the turbid waves, kowtowing piously, crawling forward inch by inch at the feet of the supreme existence. Please have mercy, the supreme king of the white crown. The tearful guide raised his head and prayed for the god's mercy. So the king of the white crown looked down, but there was no fluctuation in his calm eyes. Peter of the Campbell clan, Simon of the Russell clan, Garcia of the Jackson clan, Haywood of the Cape clan. At this point, he pointed out the names of those who had bowed their heads one by one. The supreme existence then softly asked, "Why have you come?" "To have an audience and pay tribute." The old man kowtowed again, and his tears fell into the gravel, dissolving silently. We want to offer you everything we have. Great Supreme King, we came with our entire clan and gave everything, but now, other than the traitor Helsing clan, who has become the god's lackey, our 16 vampire clans, hundreds of elites, and thousands of clansmen, the wealth and family property that we have accumulated for thousands of years, everything has been buried in this cold storm under the god's wrath. He said, "Now, other than the lives of the 14 of us, we have nothing to offer you." In the silence, the king of the white crown listened indifferently, but he did not speak. Only the old men trembled and knelt on the ground, kowtowing and begging humbly, until he spoke. "Then offer sacrifice." The guide was stunned, and then, as if he had been granted amnesty, he turned around and waved behind him. Then someone went forward on his knees, holding a small swaddling cloth, and placed the sleeping baby at the feet of the king of pure white. In his deep sleep, the small baby sucked his fingers sweetly, as if he was immersed in a beautiful dream. The old men raised their heads expectantly, looking up at the king of the white crown's face, ignoring the cold majesty that stung their eyes, and tears of blood slowly flowed down. After a long time, the king of the white crown nodded slightly. "Yes." Then the old men laughed, as if they had been released, and respectfully kowtowed before the supreme king, praising his kindness and grace. The guide at the front took out a sharp knife from his arms, raised it devoutly, and pierced it into his own chest. Blood flowed out. He closed his eyes in satisfaction, handed the handle of the knife to the person behind him, and then silently turned into ashes. Then, the second old man came forward, knelt, offered his blood, and disappeared in the wind. One after another. In the end, the old woman pierced the blood-soaked knife into her heart, but the merciless death did not come. She was stunned for a moment, and then stabbed again in fear, but her life continued. Don't be afraid. I have accepted your sacrifice. The king of the White Crown calmly instructed. One day I will collect it from you, but not now. He said, you have a more important mission. You have to continue to exist. It is my honor. Please give me your enlightenment. In such a gift and generosity, the old woman shed tears of gratitude, kowtowed devoutly, and waited for the king's edict. Take this child to the east, the king of the White Crown said. The White Crown king said, go to the place where the golden bull stands. That is the promised land that I gave you. You have to raise him. Tell him the sacrifice and piety you have offered today, and also tell him that the old blood has flowed out today, but new blood will multiply endlessly, because in the future, the blood of the whole world will come here. You have lost your people, but new people will be born. The wealth you have lost today, you will gain 10,000 times or more in the future. The king of the White Crown declared, this is my agreement with you. Go and engrave it on the stone foundation of the golden bull. As long as the golden bull exists, your prosperity will be indestructible. So, in the midst of the devout praise, the old woman picked up the baby, kowtowed, and walked towards the east. She disappeared into the wilderness. Everything returned to silence. But the long wait continued on. Countless people came, countless people kowtowed, and countless people left with redemption. From beginning to end, the king of the White Crown calmly witnessed everything, until a long time later, in the fog on the distant sea, a small lifeboat drifted over, carrying the girl who should not have existed. On that illusory face, the king of the White Crown's eyes seemed to look up, and then he understood. A new branch of the matter? He commented indifferently. You have created a fantasy that should never have appeared, and deliberately created a future that should not have existed. Whose arrangement is this? Behind him, 3 figures appeared. An old man, a woman in black, and a middle-aged man with glasses, who should not have existed here, bowed with their hands on their chests, and paid their respects to the king of the White Crown. The king of the White Crown glanced at them indifferently, and his tone became mocking. DM, what could be gained from endless risks and staking everything on a single bet? Utopia? The old man's face was calm, and his eyes were lowered. SD, can the eternal darkness and the undercurrent struggle lead to a bright future in scheming? The woman in the black robe did not speak, and her smile did not change. KP, what are you pursuing? Knowledge beyond human knowledge? Wisdom beyond human wisdom? The king of the White Crown easily saw through the nature of the newcomers, and his arrogance was not concealed. Knowledge beyond human knowledge is no inspiration to humans, and wisdom beyond human wisdom is useless to humans. When courage is exhausted, there is nothing at the end of fear. What you seek is an illusion, and what you get is only nothingness. The so-called kingdom of heaven is such a meaningless place. But this is our mission, isn't it? The newcomer spoke, and the 3 voices overlapped. The end of the eternal search must have meaning. The king of the White Crown raised his eyebrows, and after a long time, he indifferently retracted his gaze. Then, what have the guests from the other timeline brought me? A possibility. The DM said, a possibility of saving. What are we taking away? ST said, a hope to avoid repeating the same mistakes. After a short moment of silence, the king of the White Crown nodded. A fair trade. He reached out his hand. Thus, The three opened their palms, and the three broken pages overlapped, turning into an ancient scroll, and fell into the hands of the white-crowned king. From the silent surging of the waves, the majestic figure dissipated into the void. No, it should be said that they were sent out of their own domain by the white-crowned king. There was also the lifeboat that was slowly approaching the shore. On the boat, the girl who was soaked in the waves woke up from her drowsiness, opened her sleepy eyes, and stared at this strange world. It was cold and dark, cruel as if there was no warmth. "She's cold," St. said with pity. He took off a pitch-black robe from his body and gently wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. "Yes, thirsty and hungry." The DM sighed and lit a bonfire. The soup on the fire boiled, and the fish was already crispy and lonely and painful. KP waved his hand, and the dark clouds dispersed. The turbid waves were clear, and the bright sun shone between the sea and the sky. Clusters of green plants and flowers grew out of the sharp crevices, and the world was beautiful. The girl looked at them blankly and shrank back in fear, holding the broken axe blade in her arms. "Who are you?" "The people who came to greet you." St. stared at her gently. "Like you, guests who don't belong here." The DM nodded. "Like you, they belong to the fantasy that doesn't exist in reality." KP shrugged. "They are essentially the same, phantoms that don't live in the world. The spirits that only existed in records and rumors said so, staring at the girl in front of them, their eyes warm and gentle. But you are different from us. Yes, not bound by the mission. With freedom and a future with possibilities." St. reached out and gently pulled her up, leading her to the bonfire to feel the warmth. "You are here for me?" Lily couldn't believe it. "To be exact, I took credit for accurately intercepting your records and creating the path to this fictitious branch," KP said proudly. Noticing the fierce glances of his two companions, he suddenly smiled awkwardly. "Well, there were some accidents in the middle, but in short, the result is perfect." "Yes, perfect." In the end, he shut up in embarrassment. St. said, "I brought you the frankincense." She opened her 5 fingers, revealing the pure white and crystal clear cream, carrying a pure prayer. "I brought gold," the DM said, since he took out a box from his arms. In the open box, the gorgeous metal shone like the brilliance of the philosopher's stone, showing the inextinguishable faith. "Cough, cough, powder." KP took out a string of amber in a hurry. The amber reflected the light of the fire, like a mind that bloomed after being tempered. Here, he gave her a prayer that brought miracles, so that she could return to reality from nothingness. Then, he gave her an inextinguishable faith, so that she would not be lost in the countless complicated things. Finally, he gave her a firm mind, so that she could walk to the end of this dreamlike mortal world. So, illusion and reality were reversed here, and the boundary between fantasy and reality was overturned. With a record of nothingness, an unknown branch and hypothesis was derived from the history of 400 years ago. The past gradually changed in many legends and anecdotes, forming a completely different story, a story that was passed down 400 years later. In a trance, the girl seemed to understand something and looked at them in a daze. "Am I fictitious?" she asked softly. "Fake. You will exist." The sage who came in the opposite direction said, "The child who denied the miracle and the saintess who denied the abyss, the soul that originated from nothingness, the pure person, Hela, your existence is the proof of this miracle." They stared at the girl and brought a new fate. In the distant future, there will be another story about hell and heaven to be told again. And you will become a human, become a legend, a spirit of things, become the creator, and far surpass us. Go and witness all of this. They said, from this moment onwards. This was the beginning of this story in the distant past. The beginning Chapter 160. Name: Why sure. Age: 17. Occupation: cowherd. No, it just slipped out of my mouth. Why sure coughed twice. Occupation is student, also the secretary of the Astronomy Society in Exionhai and an action member. I say, can we turn off the light? Under the glaring light, he tried his best to raise his hands that were handcuffed to the table. He wanted to block his eyes, but he was still a little short. The length was not enough. No. The interrogator on the other side of the table slammed the teacup on the table and asked coldly, "Tell me, where were you at 7:30 last night? Who were you with, and what were you planning to do?" Weisher pursed his lips. "Garden restaurant with your daughter. We were going to have dinner." Bang! Division Chief Fu slammed his hand on the table and widened his eyes. "You still dare to King say that? Is it because I can't hold the gun anymore, or have you lost your mind? I've told you time and time again. And you still dare to seduce my daughter." Cough, cough. Weisher covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He explained with a straight face, "It's like this. This is a philosophical question. Humans are all born and raised by their parents, right? As long as it's a human, then it must be someone's son or daughter, right? In other words, as long as I go out for dinner, then I will definitely have dinner with someone's son or daughter, but this person's father just happens to be you. Look at this. Isn't this a coincidence?" FNMDP. Division Chief Fu glared at him hatefully. He gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. "Look at what you've done. It's one thing to break the law. Our father-daughter relationship has just improved a little, and now it's King happening again. You can't blame me for forgetting to go to the school's anniversary celebration, right? You don't want to see your wife, right?" Weisher sighed. "What a coincidence. Your wife also thinks the same." Against the light, Weisher studied Elder Fu's gloomy face. He shook his head and sighed. "Then both of you stood her up. What a sin." "What does that have to do with you eating with her?" Weisher rolled his eyes. He really couldn't stand him. "Please, she's not young anymore. She's eating with her friends, not going to a hotel. Why do you care?" Bang! "You still want to King go to a hotel?" Just as he finished speaking, a black shadow pounced on him and pulled him up from the chair. His face was ferocious. "I knew you were up to no good, you little bastard." For example, let me give you an example." Weisher was almost out of breath. "Let go of me. I'm calling for help. Save me. The Special Affairs Division is beating people up. Help." Director Fu, forget it. The people next to him were also stunned and quickly rushed forward. Some of them tried to break his hand, some tried to calm him down, and some tried to say something nice. After a long time, they finally managed to stuff Director Fu back into his chair. What a pity for all parents. Weisher sighed and shook his head helplessly. He flicked a piece of iron wire from between his fingers and twisted it a few times inside the handcuffs before unlocking them. After moving his wrists a little, he straightened his collar and sat up straight. He said earnestly, "Hey, old Fu, you know my character. Who are you calling old Fu?" Director Fu's eyes widened. "Your character? Don't you know how despicable you are?" That's King enough. Weisher was so angry that he wanted to flip the table. Then he said helplessly, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this anymore. I swear to God, I don't have any bad intentions towards your daughter." "Huh?" Old Fu's expression darkened. "You mean you're not interested in her now? That you're noble?" Weisher felt like he was going to explode. His head hurt. "Big brother, you're really my big brother. It's wrong to like her, and it's also wrong to not like her. What the CK do you want?" Old Fu's face turned green. "If you take advantage of me again, I'll throw you out of here. Do you believe me? Okay. Huaisher lowered his head helplessly and begged for mercy. Fu Yi is my good brother. Even if I die today, even if I jump down from this building, I won't think about dating her. What era are we in now? Please put away all your dirty thoughts. She's a good student, but you're not. Director Fu stared at the little bastard in front of him vigilantly. It was as if he was looking at a thief who sneaked into his backyard with a hoe when he wasn't at home. Don't you know what kind of person Fu Yi is? Okay, you don't know her very well, but you should at least have some confidence in her, okay? Huaisher scratched his head and sighed. To be honest, I'm not interested in your family's relationship, and I don't intend to interfere in her personal affairs. But at the very least, you have to understand that not everyone's head is filled with adolescent hormones and blindly fall in love. Not everyone needs their father to send a sniper to target their classmates with infrared cameras 24/7. Not everyone needs their mother to send a detective to investigate the background of every classmate. Besides, even if you do this, is it really useful? Can you change her mind? Director Fu was speechless. After a long time, he sighed irritably. She's in her rebellious phase. I have to say, if she's in her rebellious phase, you're really saving yourself a lot of trouble. Huaisher shook his head. He didn't want to argue with the biological father of his classmate about teaching his daughter anymore. He was thinking about getting the business done as soon as possible. But, he suddenly forgot what the business was. By the way, what am I doing here? How would I know? Director Fu was furious. Do you think the Special Affairs Division is your home? Do you have nothing better to do? I just came in and was handcuffed here without saying anything. I'm also very desperate. Huaisher suddenly became more and more angry. After thinking for a long time, he finally remembered and slapped his forehead. Oh, right, my border hunter license and excursion permit. Thus, old Fu's expression became very reluctant. 10 minutes later, the clerk handed a whole folder to Huaisher. TSK. Director Fu sent him out and reminded him in the end, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you have a license and permit. You have to abide by the law, understand? You're the one who took the lead in breaking the law. What right do you have to say that to me? Huaisher carried his backpack and walked away. I'm running away. I won't come again. Next time. Who could stand being locked up every time they came to this stupid place? Not long after he left, he received a call from Fu Yi. The voice on the other end of the phone was quite noisy. He could hear people coming and going. Are you free? She vaguely heard the sound of typing on the keyboard. She said, I'm in an internet cafe with Lu Rong and Liao Jun. Come on, I'll take you up. Forget it. The last person who wanted to play with me has been dead for 400 years. Huaisher shook his head and thought for a while before explaining, Don't worry, I'm fine. We're just sharing our experiences. It's just a meal. Do you think he'll send me to the border? Yes, we'll eat again next time. Fu Yi's tone seemed to be a little more relaxed. What do you want to eat? Liao Jun's voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Bring me along. It's my treat. There's a barbecue place nearby. Go away, go away. You've lost all your points. You only know how to eat. I'm stuck. Zoom in, zoom in. Rong, let's go. Hey, mine. Liao Jun was a member of the organization department of the student union. He seemed to have some thoughts about Fu Yi. Although his family background was quite good, he was not a bully. Instead, he was more like a big brother. His grades were good, his personality was good, and he could be said to be sunny and handsome. After being rejected by Fu Yi several times, he didn't seem to have given up. He had secretly inquired about her university direction. It seemed like he was planning to run a long distance. However, Miss Rome's heart was like iron. She had already seen through the world of mortals from her parents. Although she didn't deliberately ignore him, she had always tactfully limited the distance between her friends. He was afraid that she couldn't escape the good friend card. After reading her long list of life plans, Weishart doubted whether this person had any plans to get married. But this had nothing to do with him. After all, life wasn't a novel. There was more than just love. Even if they didn't get married, Weishart believed that Fu Yi would be able to rely on herself in the future. Hearing their noises, Weishart could only sigh. It's good to be young. He didn't know why, but a sense of vicissitudes of life rose in his heart. He suddenly became artistic. After a wave of team battles, Fu Yi still seemed a little worried. "You're really not eating?" "Really, I'm going home to study," Weishart said. "I'm going to Jinling for the exam next week." Okay, Fu Yi didn't say anything else. She calmly said, "Then we'll meet in Jinling." "What did you say?" Weishart was stunned. Before he could ask, the phone hung up. Weishart was left standing alone in the middle of the road. He looked at the heavy traffic in front of him with a dumbfounded expression. He suddenly felt a little scared that Director Fu would bring people to Jinling. When he got home, he saw that the flowers that Fengshu watered for the past 2 days had already bloomed. The originally bleak front yard had returned to its usual gentle appearance. Fengshu was standing at the door. After checking the package, he signed it for the delivery man. After the delivery man left, Weishart threw down his bag and saw a huge box in the living room. "What the hell? Where did you buy it? How much is it?" Weishart stared at Crow and struck him 3 times. "Your teaching materials. I bought them from the official giant Swan Tengu store of the Stoneware Society. Each set includes free shipping. They include 8 DVDs of master lectures. It's not expensive. Each set is only 4 million yuan. How much?" Weishart was so shocked that he almost jumped up and poked a hole in the ceiling. 4 million yuan for a bunch of crap? Knowledge is priceless, kid." Crow looked at him with disappointment. In this kind of monopolized industry, they can make as much money as they want. If you really learn it, you'll earn it back in a few years. "Earn my ass. It's all for you." Weishart rolled his eyes and opened the box. He found that the Stoneware Society was shockingly stingy. The big iron box was wrapped in layers of bubble wrap. In the end, there were only 10 books. One was an introduction to alchemy that didn't have any nutritional value. There were also 2 mineral illustrated handbooks and 8 books on metals. They were all things that he already knew. Weishart was furious. "You want me to pay 4 million for these crap? Did you know? Once upon a time, there was an unlucky kid like you. His family was poor, but he was gifted." Crow said, seriously, he didn't buy expensive teaching materials. He self-taught and passed the Stoneware Society's alchemy exam. Guess what happened next? He became a master? Weishart asked tentatively. Later, when the results came out, the Stoneware Society found that they couldn't find the serial number and record of the teaching materials he bought in their database. They thought that he had stolen knowledge that didn't belong to them. They reported him to the Astronomy Society and arrested him. Crow said coldly he was sentenced to 92 years in prison and hard labor for infringing the Stoneware Society's copyright. He's still in prison planting chrysanthemums. Chapter 161. Crow's poisonous chicken soup story was also very effective today. Weishart shuddered after hearing it, and immediately scolded the shameless bastards of the Stoneforge Society. "Do you think the society is used to invite people to dinner, embroider, and write calligraphy?" Crow sneered. "Protecting the interests of the group to the greatest extent is the foundation of an organization. With such a huge profit in front of them, The Stoneforge Society even dared to split from the Pioneer Society. Moreover, miracles are originally luxuries. If you don't pay the price for it, it will only lead to disaster, with the tragic consequences of the abuse of alchemy and the huge monopoly profits behind. Anyone would choose the conservative option. Then what's this other piece of paper? Weisher took out a document from the bottom of the box. It looked like a patent certificate in your name. Crow said, "Haven't you been tinkering with that a few days ago? Metal explosives." I looked it up, but there was no relevant formula. After I bought this set of materials, I immediately registered one in your name. After the cheat, if an alchemy workshop buys your patent, they can use it to produce products. It's a buyout system. It's about 400,000 at a time, and the society takes a quarter. Although it's not much, no matter how small a mosquito's leg is, it's still meat. You can more or less earn some pocket money. This was a byproduct of Weisher's improved knowledge of metals after he came back. The main body was made of unstable alloys such as magnesium, tin, and cesium. It was smelted into shape in one go, and then ignited with alchemy fire to create an explosive effect, although the effect was not very good, and it could only be used as a non-lethal weapon like a smoke bomb or a flash bomb. It could reach the power of a small fragmentation grenade if it was carefully made. It could also make up for his lack of damage output. Hearing that this thing could be sold for money, he was overjoyed. "Then, I'm going to be rich? What are you dreaming about?" Crow looked at him as if he was an idiot. "How many formulas do you think there are?" "No less than a few 100,000. There are more than 4,000 alchemy explosives that involve metal materials. It's more cost-effective than your formula. Your advantage lies in the fact that it's entirely made of metal. It can be used to great effect in certain situations, and you can rub it with your hands at any time. But do you think everyone has the alchemy fire? Without the alchemy fire to ignite it on the spot, it would have to be made in advance, which would reduce its popularity. Moreover, there are countless mature products on the market. How can there be room for a small workshop like ours to stir up trouble?" Weisher felt a chill in his heart when he heard this. He immediately comforted himself. After investing so much, there's finally hope of recovering the cost. "It's fine as long as I can sell it and make a little profit." After discarding his dream of getting rich overnight, Crow inquired about Weisher's progress. "How far have you progressed with the silver blood potion?" Weisher scratched his head. "According to your suggestion, we'll work on both ends. One will take 5 minutes and can be used as a small health potion. The other will only take about 4 seconds and can be used as an enhanced Band-Aid. All right, this way, you'll have a healing skill." Crow didn't ask for more. Something like the silver blood potion was enough. There was no need to invest more effort to specialize in it. If his alchemy level could be raised, then the effect would naturally rise. Moreover, the most technical part of this thing wasn't the potion itself, but the patented solvent that prevented the silver blood potion from solidifying after cooling. Otherwise, the silver blood potion would turn from liquid to solid after an hour of production. At that time, its original effect would be removed, and it would even become a poison. After all, not many people's stomachs were strong enough to digest metal. As for the solvent that prevented solidification, each workshop had their own techniques and methods, and the price was higher than the other. If it was for personal use, there was no need to buy it at all. In short, it's fine. Many big bosses can't reach your level. For the time being, there's no need to invest any more time. Crow spread his wings and motioned for him to follow him to the basement. In the darkness, when he passed through the basement's corridor, he heard the faint sound of electric current. The old light bulb hanging above his head flickered, but in the flickering of the light, Weisher found that his body began to fade. When he deliberately entered the state of a ghost, he found that his body flashed and disappeared with the flickering of the light. In a dark place, his silhouette would melt into a dim gray fog, and under the dim light, it was difficult to feel his existence. It was like an illusion reflected by a projector in the dust. Crow noticed the abnormality in his body and looked back. His eyes were slightly satisfied. "Very good. It seems that you've almost mastered the ghost. Should I prepare to advance?" Huaisher asked. "No rush." Crow shook his head. "There are many ways to advance, but before that, I still need to make a choice." "To be honest, I'm still hesitating." "What are you hesitating about?" "A lot of hesitation. For example, the future, your life, and other trivial things." Crow landed on the table, so I decided to wait and see. At least choose the most suitable one, right? Just choose one. That's not a trap. Huaisher waved his hand. He wanted to cry for the cat. He was really scared of being tricked by Crow. "Don't worry. If the plan doesn't go wrong, you won't have to drive illegal cars in the future." Crow waved his wings and pointed at the silver cross spear on the table. "You can take that away." Cross spear, compassion. Huaisher had awakened another type of origin substance weapon. It was a rare long weapon. Even though he didn't know how to use it, it could still be used to stab people. And its effect was to let the person who was stabbed by Huaisher feel the sorrow and pity in Huaisher's heart. It was as if he was saying, "I didn't have any other choice. I didn't stab you on purpose. Who told you to be so disobedient?" Even though it sounded quite strange, it was only when one was actually stabbed by it that they realized how vicious its effects were. Just like how the axe of wrath could cause a person's mind to be shaken, or how the rope of sorrow could cause a person to feel discouraged, the spear of compassion could cause an enemy's fighting spirit to crumble, causing them to think about what they were doing, whether or not everything they were doing had any meaning, and why they were doing it. Even if they were stabbed to death, they wouldn't feel any hatred or unwillingness in their hearts. Instead, they would feel calm and peaceful. It was basically the spear of salvation. After Huaisher had been stabbed, he had been in the state of a sage for a full hour. From then on, he no longer wanted to be Crow's test subject. Of course, the most important thing was the Azure Crown Dragon's blood. It was as if there was an endless flow of dragon blood. The faint trace of blood constantly dripped with sticky, poisonous blood. The Philosopher's Stone's unique properties gave it inconceivable miracles. Wherever the blood dripped, a pure, white iris flower would grow. After 10 minutes, it would wither along with the dissipating blood. If it danced, the whole practice field would become beautiful. Fragrant and pure petals would bloom in every corner, interweaving into a dazzling garden. Just this sound and visual effect alone made Huaisher want to give KP 100,000 likes. But what made him even more satisfied was the effect of the dragon blood. Decay. The most terrifying thing about the Azure Crown Dragon was its breath of decay that could compare to time. Wherever the breath passed, all things would decay. This characteristic seemed to have been inherited by the dragon blood, and now it was attached to Huaisher's spear. This led to the fact that when stabbed, once the dragon blood on the spear entered the victim's body, the victim's energy would begin to decline rapidly. If the dosage was high enough, it would even cause a temporary aging effect. Even if it wasn't tainted by the dragon blood, just being in this field of flowers and smelling its fragrance would cause one's energy to rapidly decline, causing dizziness and depression. Simply put, Huaisher would be able to enjoy beating up old people even more in the future. But the most troublesome thing was that this poison was also effective on Huaisher. He had no way of avoiding it. Thus, he could only ask Crow to study its properties and temporarily create an antidote. The result was the syringes on the table. Use one of the previous ones. It should last for about half an hour. Just use it carefully, Crow said casually. Now, we need to start a physical examination. It was still the same old routine. There were all sorts of common and uncommon methods, as well as blood tests and CT scans. Yes, CT scans. Crow had even bought a CT machine and placed it in the corner of the room. Every few days, she would call Weisher over to take a picture. In any case, an ascendant's physique was very long, so this level of radiation was nothing. Actually, the main thing this time was to check if there were any side effects. When they were on the ship, Weischer's origin substance and Van Helsing's origin substance had coexisted for too long. Generally speaking, this situation would cause Weischer's consciousness to be completely covered by Van Helsing, turning him into a walking corpse. However, there was the artifact Book of Destiny, which carried all the memories of the first half of his life, ensuring his personality and soul's independence. Therefore, the only thing to worry about was that the contamination of the origin substance would cause slight changes to the body. Fortunately, everything was under control. It was just that Weischer wasn't used to it. After being a level 3 ascendant for so long, and even acting as a fake holy light fighter, returning to his own body made him especially uncomfortable, especially since Van Helsing was one of the best among level 3 ascendants. Now, Weischer even had to use all his strength to barely catch up to the foundation he had when he was Van Helsing, and sometimes he was far from it. The lag in his nerve reflexes allowed him to get used to it, but it was still uncomfortable. It's done. Crow raised his eyes from the results and pointed to the end of the basement, at the iron pile 20 meters away. Let me see your current limit of speed and strength. I'll try. Weischer moved his body slightly, and darkness covered his body. His whole body was shrouded in darkness, and the crack in his chest surged with spiraling light. Feeling the majestic dark origin substance in his body, he closed his eyes and exhaled the breath in his lungs. In the next moment, a sinister bloody light burst out from his eyes. A roar sounded. Chapter 162. In the blink of an eye, a gust of wind blew in the room. Amidst the deafening sound, the cross spear appeared in Weischer's hand. As he stepped forward, it tore through the air again, bursting forth with a shrill whistle. A blazing light, like melting steel, flashed and disappeared. Then there was the sound of something shattering. At the end of the basement, an iron stake covered with a special alloy had been penetrated by the spear blade, drilling a deep crack, and the two branches of the spear wedged into the steel. Amidst the crisp sound of the crack spreading, there was the sound of the alloy surface peeling off. On the wall behind the iron stake, a crack silently appeared. Where the spear tip pointed, dust flowed down from the crack and piled up on the ground, forming a pile of white dust. At that moment, Weischer, who had used all his strength, regained the speed and strength of a vampire. Although the price was that he was almost exhausted and his arms were numb. But if he used the dust of the dispelled, he could even use this kind of attack a few more times. Even if he used the alchemy fire to control the explosion, he could divide the dust of the dispelled from the inside out into 16 layers and explode like a fuse, creating an even more exaggerated lethality in an instant. Very good. Crow seemed to have finally gained confidence. With your level, I can rest assured that you can participate in the demon-slaying competition. What competition? Weischer was stunned. The demon-slaying competition. Crow said calmly. You should know what it is just from the literal meaning, right? There's such a competition. Weischer only felt that it was amazing. Sure enough, there were all kinds of strange things in this world. It was founded by a group of troublesome group leaders, and the location is in a small mobile border. It can be said that it's one of the most famous competitions in the border. This time, it's only a selection in the southern part of the Dongsha region. If you participate, the chances of winning are not small. The most important thing is that among the prizes, there are many products from hell, and there's a high probability that there will be materials related to your next advancement. Hearing about his advancement, Huaishur immediately became extremely cautious. But soon, he noticed the vocabulary in her words. Group leader? He was stunned. Which group's administrator? If you understand it that way, it's not too much of a problem. Crow looked at him speechlessly. The so-called leader of a large group is used by the people of the present realm to refer to the rulers of a part of the depths of hell. They are usually strong people who have lived in hell for hundreds of years. They are monsters among monsters. They themselves are the leaders and rulers of a certain race. Almost every one of them can represent the existence of a force in hell. You understand now? It sounds so strong. There are strong ones and weak ones. The strong ones can fight their natural enemies head-on, while the weak ones can be beaten up by you. Crow cautiously said, this competition can be tacitly approved by the Astronomical Society, and even be able to send out invitations in the present realm. This proves that their power is definitely not low. You have to be careful, don't offend the organizers. Being blacklisted is a small matter, but if they do something to you, then you'll be in trouble. Although they won't go as far as to kill their own contestants, they can still leave some kind of curse that will make you unlucky for decades. Moreover, their curses are especially torturous. The last person who messed around in the competition was cursed. Until now, everything he drank tasted like cold water. He hasn't drunk a mouthful of hot water for decades. Even his feces is not warm. Huaishur suddenly shivered after hearing this. He immediately reacted. No, these guys should generally be demons, right? Is there something wrong with spending money to have a demon-slaying competition? You'll know when you go. Crow looked at him with a complicated expression. This competition is very important to you, although it's a bit beyond your limits. I hope you can win. Don't worry, as long as there's no fourth step, I can still fight. Huaishur thought for a long time and encouraged himself. If you can solve it just by fighting, then it'll be easy. Crow sighed worriedly. It's rare for you to be so confident, so I won't discourage you. I'll be prepared later. I hope you can also use these tools flexibly. When does this competition start? Huaishur asked. What a coincidence. It's tonight. Crow revealed a smile that made Huaishur uneasy. Isn't this a coincidence? As she said this, she picked up the black invitation letter with some kind of hell's language written in gold and placed it in front of Huaishur. I wish you a safe journey. Midnight, 12 o'clock. On the lawn behind the Chalcedony Hall, Huaishur carried a huge iron box, as if he was delivering takeout. He also wore a cheap plastic Pepsi mask on his face. He looked down at the invitation letter in his hand, puzzled. He felt that there was something wrong with this Demon Slayer competition, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Carrying the box of secret weapons Crow prepared for him, he didn't even have time to open it before he was urged to go by Crow. But before he left, he was stopped by Fong Shu. Young master, that. He looked at the plastic mask on Huaishur's face that cost $2 and hesitated for a long time. Then he took out a cloth bag from his arms. It's a bit inappropriate to wear that kind of thing. If you don't mind, I have. Huaishur took it in puzzlement. When he opened the cloth bag, his face twitched behind the mask. Okay, he picked up the mask and the cloth bag. It was made of iron, and when he knocked on it, it made a clanging sound. If he guessed correctly, Uncle Fong must have used the hairdryer in the storage room in the backyard to cut it in half and welded it himself. In order to cater to his young master's strange aesthetic, he even found a can of spray paint from who knows where. After spraying it pink, he welded 2 screws on it to act as eyeballs. Still Pepsi. Isn't this still Pepsi? Huai sure wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Seeing Feng Shu's expectant eyes, he could only squeeze out a smile and keep it on his face. Feng Shu looked at it attentively, picked up the paintbrush in his hand, and painted 2 red circles on it. After that, he took a step back and smiled with relief. It was as if he was looking at the most handsome boy within a few 100 miles. Then I'll prepare breakfast and wait for you to come back. He nodded and saluted, then turned and left. Look, even Feng Shu is cheering for you. On Huaishi's shoulder, Crow sighed. You have to do your best. I feel even more powerless. What should I do? Then think of something better. For example, how about your savings? Crow said, I've spent more than 10 million and only have 800 left. You have to work harder to support your family. Please don't say any more, okay? Huaishi became more and more powerless. His whole body seemed to have turned pale. He didn't want to pay attention to this stupid thing. He picked up the invitation and walked onto the lawn. According to Crow's translation on the invitation, it was very simple to participate in the competition. All he had to do was hold the invitation and walk around the 3-way intersection a few times at a predetermined time. The organizer would receive his signal and pull him into the border. It sounded unbelievably convenient, but the problem was, where was he supposed to find the 3-way intersection? The intersection was easy to find, but suddenly asking Huaishi to find a 3-way intersection was a bit of a pain in the ass. In desperation, he could only follow Crow's instructions. Anyway, it was a road. His own road was also a road. During the day, Feng Shu used a lawn mower to push out a small path on the lawn. Why does it seem so unreliable? Under the quiet moonlight, Huaishi stared at the simple 3-way intersection on the lawn in front of him. With the invitation in hand, he took a step forward and then froze in place. It was foggy. The more he walked forward, the thicker the fog became, until he followed the ritual on the invitation and stood still at the 3-way intersection. After taking 10 steps in 3 different directions, the fog was so thick that he couldn't even see his own fingers. In a brief moment of absent-mindedness, Huaishi seemed to hear the faint sound of a bell. The fog suddenly dissipated. He was back at the 3-way intersection. But this time, he was no longer on the lawn of his house, but on a busy intersection that was wide enough for several carriages to come and go. In fact, there were really all kinds of old-fashioned carriages coming and going at the 3-way intersection. With the light hanging on the carriages, Huaishi could see that there were human-like existences in the carriages. Even the coachman's face had scales or cheeks. In addition to horses, there were all kinds of messy things that were pulling the carriages. There was even an early simple car that drove past him, leaving a choking smoke behind. And in the car, the arrogant green-skinned goblin was still shouting angrily, go away, don't block the road." Huaishi was obedient and obediently moved to the side of the road. When he looked at the road sign, he found that the words on it were completely unrecognizable. Following his gaze, the words on the road sign twisted like a living creature and then turned into the Eastern Xia language. Left, White Town. Right, Green Island Food Fair. Back, Gray Coast. Go to Green Island. Remember not to go in the wrong direction. Crow reminded him. This is an intermediate border. It will be troublesome if you get lost. Food fair? Huaishi was stunned. Are you sure? Just go. Why are you asking so many questions? Okay. As they walked forward, Huaishi felt that there were more and more people on the side of the road, as if they had suddenly walked out of a fork in the fog. Most of them looked like humans, and quite a few of them were ascendants. Their bodies glowed, faintly, and they carried all kinds of weapons with them. They seemed to be very skilled, and a few of them gave Huaishi a sense of threat. When those guys lowered their heads to look at people, their eyes were like looking at food. At some point, the ground under his feet had turned into a cement road. In the distance, lights that looked like a playground lit up, and there was a hubbub of voices. But when Huaishe raised his head, he felt a chill and froze on the spot. Crow looked at his stunned expression and could not help but sigh. "What's wrong? Why are you so surprised? Don't make people think that you're from the countryside, okay?" But the sky. Huaishe looked up at the sky, or rather, the thing that was supposed to be the sky, above the sky. As far as the eye could see, the bright starry sky had disappeared, and in its place was a turbulent ocean. Countless undercurrents surged, setting off layers of waves. The waves splashed, but they did not fall to the ground. The vast and boundless dark ocean enveloped everything. White sails could be vaguely seen jumping and sailing at the tip of the wind and waves, separated by tens of thousands of meters. Huaishe could even hear the faint roar of countless currents colliding. The ocean was surging, constantly turbulent, as if it would pour down from the sky at any time, drowning everything. Chapter 163. Just thinking about this, Huaishe couldn't help but shiver. Isn't it the same in the realm of discovery? You can accept the coral clouds. So why can't you accept the sky changing? Crow calmly asked. Don't worry. At worst, you can just treat it as a change of material. But why did it become like this? The entire border area of Dongsha is like this. To be exact, the entire border area of Asia is covered by this endless sea. Every few days, a torrent will sweep across and descend from the sky, drowning everything. Then they will begin to rebuild and wait for the next torrent to descend. It's even worse in Rome. It's said that the entire city has sunk into the earth's crust. The fire in the Middle East hasn't been extinguished yet. The Steel City is built on fire and lava. Crow sighed. This is the proof of leaving the realm of discovery. Huaishe, in a stable place like the border, you don't have to worry about other dangers, but don't think about returning to the cradle. Be tough and show your manly spirit. Isn't it just a sea? Just pretend it doesn't exist. Although he said that, it was impossible to pretend you didn't see such a big thing. Huaishe almost forced himself to lower his head and forget about this matter. He didn't have to worry about the sea above suddenly crashing down. He braced himself and walked forward. Next to him, a fat man saw his stiff appearance and couldn't help but laugh. He scratched his armpits and chuckled in the body odor. "A new face, young man. You look quite capable. Are you also a participant in this year's demon slaying competition?" Yes. Huaishe carefully slowed down a little, wanting to avoid the suffocating body odor. However, he soon found that the smell behind him was even worse. He could only grit his teeth and speed up. When the time comes, bring it on." The fat man grinned and looked quite hot-blooded. "I won't lose to you." Unfortunately, his figure did not appear to be one that could slay monsters and devils. Furthermore, he was carrying an iron wok on his back. He appeared to be a chef. Fortunately, the fat man soon slowed down and began to chat and laugh with his greasy companions, looking at the huge boxes they carried, their heavy footsteps, and their robust bodies. All of them reminded Huaishe that they were all strong enemies. It didn't take long for Huaishe to reach the amusement park lights. He saw the crowd surging through the open iron gate. Not only were there people from Dongsha, Yingzhou, Myanmar, and so on, but there were also many white and black people walking among them. Their eyes were fierce, and their expressions were cold as they looked at the contestants next to them. However, their attire was a little strange, which made Huaishe feel that something was wrong. What was even more shocking was that just outside the door, the bustling square was actually filled with stalls. all kinds of strange people were loudly hawking all kinds of strange things. Take a look, take a look. 30-year-old canned herring. It smells disgusting, it tastes disgusting, and it's limited. If you want to buy it, hurry up. Authentic soy milk, premium Scottish fold. Everyone, come and take a look. We have everything. Don't miss it. Fresh rotten durian. Authentic green hair poisonous wine brewed with selected goblin leg hair. It has been selected as a non-cultural heritage of hell. If I drink it today, you will have an inheritance tomorrow. Freshly cooked abyss snail noodles with curry. Oh my God! Huaisher was hit by the stench. He staggered back and almost vomited. His face was pale. Crow looked at him in confusion. What are you waiting for? Go and buy it. Huaisher was dumbfounded. Buy what? Your materials. Crow asked. If you don't buy fresh materials, how can you participate in the demon slaying competition? Are you going to rely on these broken things to slay demons? Huaisher felt that he was going crazy. Do you have to chant scriptures? Crow froze in place and looked at him blankly. After a long time, he said hesitantly, I know what's wrong. Huaisher was puzzled. Have you misunderstood from the beginning? Crow sighed. The demon-slaying competition I'm talking about is not the demon-slaying competition. Huaisher was alert. It's the chef's chef. What's that? Huaisher turned around and looked in the direction of the gate. There was a signboard. On the signboard, a line of strange words kept changing. In the end, it was fixed in the Dongsha language. The 107th Demon Slaying Competition East Asia Audition. Dongsha Arena, contestants, please get ready. A low voice sounded from the loudspeaker, with a trembling voice like two tongues. In 10 minutes, you will officially enter the arena to prepare for the competition. Please maintain an orderly line. Do not violate the safety regulations in the arena. Violators will be cursed by the group leaders. In a daze, Huaisher turned his head stiffly and looked at Crow's innocent face. He swallowed his saliva and asked, Is it too late for me to leave now? Also, because too many contestants have left this year, the organizing committee has decided that contestants who have an invitation but do not participate in the competition will be punished. The strange voice from the loudspeaker shouted loudly, These cowards will be cursed by the judges. They will only be able to eat *tea-flavored curry and curry *tea for the rest of their lives. In the awkward silence, Crow looked at Huaisher with pity. I don't think so. F*ck. Huaisher was in complete despair. Should he say that this competition was too King crazy, or that it was indeed a competition held by the group leaders? It was full of hellish craziness, as always. Even the result of their pursuit was so different. If the demon-slaying competition was to see who could cook better, then the demon-slaying competition was, that's right, it was to see who could cook worse food. According to the group of people in the organizing committee who had nothing better to do every day, there was a limit to the so-called delicious food, no matter how hard one tried. But there was no limit to how bad it tasted. There was no limit to how bad it tasted. There would be no worst food, only worse food. And the so-called demon-slaying competition was a competition to see who could cook worse food. Since its birth 100 years ago, it had attracted many strong contestants from all over the world, the border, and even hell. It had created many miracles and nightmares. Until now, the standard way to watch the competition was to wear a gas mask, and it was the kind that covered the head as well. Originally, there wasn't any. All they needed was a mask. However, ever since the champion of the previous 9 tournaments brought out a pot of demon jumps over the wall in the finals, 1/3 of the audience fell into severe depression and despair after smelling the horrible smell. They lost the hope of living and committed suicide in the following months. The aftermath had spread and still hadn't been extinguished. Later, in order to cherish their lives, everyone had to spend a little more money. Even if it was just the East Asian region of Dongsha, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. No one knew how many monsters were lurking among them. As for Huaishir, she could only tremble in fear. He felt like he was going to die. How the hell was he going to fight? He couldn't win. He was going to lose. Don't be discouraged. Believe in yourself. You will definitely create a miracle. Crow had put on a crow's mouth gas mask and patted him on the shoulder with a deep voice. I will cheer for you in the audience. What the hell? Huaishir was stunned. You're not going with me? Why should I go with you? That stinks. It's not that. The crow coughed dryly. The rules of the competition are quite strict, and they don't allow pets. Furthermore, I'm just a pitiful and helpless little crow. I can't help you. Anyway, I've given you the tools, and you've bought the materials. After that, you can use your own creativity. After saying that, the crow left Huaishir alone and flew away. Huaishir was left standing alone in the same place. Under the fierce glare of the security guard, he walked into the contestant lounge with tears in his eyes. Then he stiffened in place. At this moment, in the contestant lounge, Huaishir felt the breath of strong people coming from all directions, as well as body odor. Amidst the dozens of white arms, Huaishir recalled that everyone here used to be a powerhouse who was sweating in the kitchen with their upper bodies bare. The elites of the dark cuisine world. They were either aunties who had been cooking in the school cafeteria for more than 10 years, chefs who had worked on the green train for more than 5 years, or magicians who mixed gutter oil and artificial essence to create nightmarish flavors. Noticing that Huaishir had walked in, there were a few fierce gazes that looked over. When they saw that the person who had walked in was a weak chicken with a pale face, they snorted and looked away in disdain. A few solid gazes collided in the air. Bursts of electricity. Humph, old Wong, give up. The orthodox dark cuisine is in the higher education world. In the middle of the room, a middle-aged woman stood with her hands behind her back and coldly said, in order to refine the secret recipe, I worked in the University of Science and Technology for 14 years. Now, your insignificant skills can't win against this rotten tomato stir-fried mooncake in my hands. Persecuting innocent university students all day long. What the F***CK are you proud of? Chi. Old Wong crossed his arms and sneered. How can this kind of thing used to fool children compare to the hellish cuisine of our dining car? That feeling of being sealed with nowhere to run, and the feeling of joy in your heart when you swallow the food into your stomach with fear. Junior sister, you will never understand it. It's obviously a disgusting dish. Why are you so proud of it? Moreover, junior sister, what are you doing? What kind of internal strife is this? I beg you, don't persecute an innocent youth like me. Why don't you go back and find a kitchen to compare? Before Huaishir could spit out a mouthful of blood, he heard a scalp-numbing sharp laughter coming from a dark corner of the room where the light couldn't reach. Kakik, what are you two youngsters in such a hurry for? That gloomy and stooped old man raised his turbid eyes, emitting a cold light. Our May Mountain's Golden Peak sect will definitely win this competition. Today, we'll let you experience the power of our famous cuisine. Every bite will make you feel heartache. What the hell is the Golden Peak sect? Is it very proud to rip off customers at famous attractions? Are you guys holding a martial arts convention? I'll have to trouble you to retract your magical powers. Huaishir's origin substance was already unstable from the pressure of the expert's aura. He was about to go crazy. Just as the other two siblings were about to retort, they heard the door open with a loud rumble. Amidst the heavy footsteps, a deep voice announced loudly from outside the door, Dijin Authentic Cat ignores steamed bun restaurant head chef Lu has arrived. In the blink of an eye, the room suddenly froze. Huaishur saw countless waves of origin substance filled with fighting spirits soar into the sky. Countless broken pots and spatulas clanged together, and even the smelly fish in the basket jumped up with all their might. It was as if 10,000 swords were clanging together, paying respects to the great master. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.